Thanks for being with us tonight. I am Johnny Robertson, and we are live on What Does the Bible Say? This is a special edition. Caleb and I are going to be talking about his recent interview with Alan Hires. Caleb, what actually motivated you to get involved with Alan Hires?
I think that everybody would just say that it was the automatic of... So when I went to talk to Rubel Shelly, it was 1984. His book, I Just Want to Be a Christian, so I think that a lot of people would assume that it was going to just get Alan's perspective on Rubel Shelly from 1984-85. And we really didn't talk about that too much. I had started looking at Alan Hires, and the big thing that took me to Alan Hires was the 1973 Memphis meeting that had to do with Herald of Truth. And so I think our generations are very different. So you would say that probably people in your generation still remember Herald of Truth?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The people that are in my generation certainly recognize a split in the churches of Christ. And so one of the things that we're definitely trying to do tonight, we want a younger generation to be able to recognize what has taken place and why it is that your grandparents may be talking about something and your grandparents don't want to do certain things that maybe you're inclined to do, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's going on with that? I think by us having these interviews, I mean, Alan Hires is 86 years old. And I don't even know, how many people have grandparents that are living in that time frame. But Alan Hires can cover 60 years easily,
Right.
In the brotherhood. And so certainly individuals are going to know about Herald of Truth.
Remember the church, his name is Steve Wolfgang, and he's up in Chicago. But he says, for people like Alan, and Steve Wolfgang has his own perspectives, but the way that he says it is, at some point you lose, he said, like the actual person memory, and he said, by the time you said grandparents. So Steve Wolfgang would say, by the time you get to your grandkids, they don't know anything. And like he said, they didn't live through it. And if grandparents have been talking about it, they don't know. If the grandkids don't read about it, they don't know. But the value of talking to Alan Hires was living in it, experiencing it, and also for the audio bumper on YouTube, I said about going to interview Rubel that I did that for young guys, because Rubel was maybe 39 during the 1984 Open Forum, and he had, young man, everybody had appreciated him, and the same thing for Alan Hires. When they did the Memphis meeting in 1973, he would have just been like mid-30s, something like that. And so they're in that. Herald of Truth is this massive national television broadcast, started out as radio broadcast, and my whole thing is looking at that and asking the question, does history repeat itself? And so I think he had good notes on it, and I think that's one of the bigger things that I went to talk to Alan about. And so the interview is at least an hour long. It's not as long as talking to Rubel, but it has its own pieces in there. It's broken up into different different topics. His involvement in something that was called the Arlington Meeting in 1968. And again, how familiar do you think?
No one.
Okay.
Yeah, I doubt hardly anyone knows about the Arlington meeting. Some know about the Dallas meeting, which is, again, perspective-wise, this is a group of individuals in the Church of Christ that opposed another side of the Church of Christ as a result of Christian colleges. It's an institution. Orphans' homes, it's an institution again, and then things like how you use the church building and how you spend your money, how you cooperate with other brethren. Those are kinds of things that created a huge split in the Church of Christ. And so, when Caleb, when people are watching us, and we know that our local audience here in town, and we're in the county-wide channel tonight, I don't really think they have any concept of the Church of Christ, because when I moved here, no one knew what the Church of Christ was. And
Right.
it's, people can say what they want to about, how I feel or what I'm actually saying about myself in regard to that, I can't help it.
Yeah.
People didn't know what the Church of Christ is. We've been on television for 20 plus years, and it's not just like we go in and do some tired old show, or put up one of our tired old sermons on Sunday night. These are cliches that I'm using.
Yeah.
We're knocking doors. We get into everybody's business. They called us the hall monitor. We think we're religion's hall monitor around here. Hey, it's because we care about the division, care about the fact that you have a wedding and your bride's parents can't stand the fact that they're marrying you. And we're not talking about people in the Church of Christ either.
Yeah.
We're talking about Pentecostals and Baptists. We have good friends that we hope are moving here in the future, and they are new converts, fairly new, particularly the wife, and her grandmother is Hispanic and Catholic. And the first thing, she's pregnant, first thing that happened, why aren't we going to have the christening? Man, you talk about an upheaval, and that's the kind of stuff we're concerned about.
Yeah.
That kind of peace that you can't have because everybody's wrangling about their different faiths.
Well, and that's the thing too. I think there will be a number of people they'll like getting to see an interview with Alan Hires, but I think that Alan Hires is going to say some things about them. He's going to, Alan is going to say, right now we have a non-confrontational attitude about ourselves, but it's like...
He says that.
Right, he says that about just the church at large. And so I think a number of people, they'll like to see Alan Hires, and they'll hearken back to, they'll think things like, the Church of Christ used to be the fastest growing religious organization in the
1965.
Yeah, and it's like, they didn't get that way by being non-confrontational. So I think with this, to be honest, and not to like put a bad taste in people's mouths, I think that there will be so many different points in the interview that are actually going to, if I would say, subconsciously irk your generation. Because it's going to be, he will consistently be hearkening back to a time that has for a long time not existed, and I would say it exists here. Meetings that last longer than 3 days. One of the things that Alan Hires, and I would say rightfully, if you call it a brag, he said, whatever their radio program was called, Truth and Love, out of Getwell, he said, my radio broadcast was the first one that went longer than 15, 20 minutes. He said he was doing like 40-minute broadcasts. He liked that. We're doing hour-long broadcasts, right? We're doing hour-long evening broadcasts. They are confrontational. The meetings
He's answering questions from the audience.
Right. He was answering those questions. And, of course, he was for debating. People can say what they want to. There's a load of preachers right now that they're like, if you asked them behind closed doors, do you think debating works? No. It's going to do more damage than it does good. Well, I don't think that Alan thinks that.
Oh, no. So just perspective-wise, I was telling someone that was raised in Abilene, Texas the other day, and that's pretty much a resident of Texas. He's 50-something years old, and I had to bring him up on who Alan Hires is. For those of you watching, Alan Hires is a person that was the editor of the Spiritual Sword magazine. That's going to only interest individuals in the Church of Christ. Spiritual Sword magazine. It's been in Memphis, Tennessee, the entire time.
I was going to say the west corner of Tennessee.
And so then Alan Hires is pretty much a resident of Henderson, Tennessee, which is the home of Freed-Hardeman University. Freed-Hardeman is looked at as a sound school in association with the Churches of Christ. Some people are not going to like describing that way, and I'm doing quotes. To me, they're just simply a college.
Yeah.
Members of the Church of Christ go there, but Alan Hires has been conducting the open forum. He conducted for 20 years. He's not doing it anymore. He's 86 years old, and so he is a federal judge, so he is just well-known personality in many different realms. The interview that we're doing, he tells some things about his early days. He was 29 years old when we are talking about him being at Getwell. He already had gone to Lipscomb. He'd already gone to Freed-Hardeman. He'd already gone to Lipscomb, and he was actually in Harding Graduate, taking some Harding Graduate schools there in Memphis, Tennessee. So, 29 years old, he's doing all that. Let me just see.
So, when I start out with him, there's going to be plenty of detail in the interview that they're not going to know. But I do want to say this, like if we can get going on this route for just a moment. I don't know I can imagine that there will be people who don't even like that I sat down with Alan Hires. Someone might say, conservatives who wouldn't like talking to Alan Hires? Yes, I think there are a number of people who would call themselves conservatives, and they're still not, I think if you said, what do you think the perspective was of me sitting down with Rubel Shelly?
When you sat down with Rubel Shelly, everybody thought you were a liberal. They basically have seen some of your broadcasts. They've seen us talking about a failure to ever give anybody a break, which to people that are watching tonight, that basically means that God's grace is a great part of, none of us are going to be saved without the grace of God.
Yeah.
But you don't hear that very much, and when you start hearing it a lot because of a lack of hearing it, then other people are going to say, well, y'all are leaning too far the other way, and you solidified it when you had an interview with Rubel Shelly. And then, I don't know if you were going to talk about this, but we have both of us have a mutual friend who just couldn't believe that you were so easy on Rubel Shelly. And so, one of the things too, Caleb, that we might have not said is tomorrow night is the actual interview.
Yeah.
The reason we're doing this broadcast tonight is because tomorrow night it's going to debut the Alan Hires interview, and you couldn't get two more individuals that are diametrically opposed than Alan Hires and Rubel Shelly. And so, when a person is thinking about you and they are saying that okay, you're a liberal. Well, how did you get Alan Hires to actually sit down?
Would be my, I didn't have anybody really go out of their way to tell me they didn't like the Rubel Shelly interview. I had one person call. There's a moment where I'm sitting down with Rubel, and I said to him, I hope you write a book on the Old Testament. And the person said to me on the phone, they said, well, I don't know how you said that you hope he writes another book on the Old Testament. And I said, there's a load of stuff that he could talk about in the Old Testament that's not going to involve any error. And I just asked him, I said, have you ever read the book by Gold Music called Behold the Pattern? And he said, oh yeah, we just did a Bible class on that. And I said,
Rubel Shelly said that?
no, this is a man who calls about Rubel Shelly.
All right.
And he said, we just did a Bible class on Behold the Pattern. And I said, did you see his notes on the indwelling of the Holy Spirit? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you agree with that? And he said, no. And I said, but you're fine to just go ahead and read that. And I said, you and I are both now saying we don't agree with that. Mm-hmm. And he said, I get it. And so just him, but I would say this, exactly, in one sense, exactly what I wanted to happen happened. It's not that I really went in and I don't really think that he cares to have it. It's not like I was trying to make an entrance for Rubel Shelly back into 2024 Freed Hardeman lectures, get him an appreciation dinner or anything. Mm-hmm. But I would say this, that different people had their perspective. I don't even know if he had perspective of that event before, but listen to this. This is his name is Tony Brewer, and he went through Memphis maybe a year or two after I did. The man on the bottom is one of Micah's classmates, and I don't know who the man over there is. But here's what he listened to: the 1984 open forum between Rubel and Allen, and this was his takeaway.
Here to talk about the 1984 speech that Rubel Shelly was allowed to give in the Freed Hardeman Open Forum in defense of a paper or booklet that he produced about a year before in 1983 entitled Christians Only, A Plea for Unity. And we're going to listen to that, and we're going to pause it and offer commentary. I want to start by saying everyone in this restream is unified here. Rubel Shelly has been publicly marked. He's been withdrawn from. He is a false teacher. We are going to talk a little bit about that. It is a master class in equivocation and definition of terms, listening to him speak now. But I do not believe in 1984 he was outside of fellowship, and I do not believe he was treated fairly. And
now, I don't really have a problem saying that point, that I wanted young guys to see what the machine and the system can do to them. So, like, I didn't really even when I'm sitting down with Rubel, what Tony Brewer said was not something that I had thought about asking Rubel was, had you been officially withdrawn from? And it's like, you're not. You're just being ostracized and pushed out of the circle, which I would say is exactly what in 1984 he was saying would happen. If I don't come in and the way he would say it is, if I don't come in and salute the flag, then I'm on the outside anyways. So that's my thing, is I just think that there's a lot of stuff that people haven't looked at, and I think there's a lot of detail that hasn't been presented. I mean, if we're only letting one side of the story tell half of the story, his takeaway was, I think he was mistreated, and I think that a number of young guys will receive the exact same treatment until, I would say, if we called it the political playbook, if the political playbook doesn't start to get more exposing, then young guys are just going to keep falling into those traps.
Well, we certainly know what it is like to be marginalized, and one of the reasons that we're in front of you, one of the reasons that Caleb can have the interview with Rubel Shelly, the reason he can have the interview with Alan Hires, and then we also sit down with one of the elders that was back there in the days at Getwell when both Alan Hires and Rubel Shelly were there. He wasn't an elder back then, but he has that perspective. The reason why is because we really didn't let what people say about us and their decision to try to marginalize us affect us in any way, in the sense of, well, we've got to somehow or other respond to what they're doing because of what they're doing to us. We're in no way concerned about what folk actually think they have done to us, and by you seeing these interviews, you should be able to realize that we're bringing something to you that you cannot get anywhere else. You can watch other interviews that people have put up. One of the interviews that Caleb's going to do later will be with Steve Wolfgang. Steve Wolfgang is one of the most noted individuals still alive in the split that we talked about a moment ago with the folk that were opposing the Christian colleges, so do we, and the different institutions in the church. That individual is a huge player in all of this. We've seen interviews, and it's like, I just want to diss their interviews. Listen, the interviews that we're doing, these are things you don't ask people and then expect them to continue on with the interview.
So,
and then they see this, right?
Right.
They see other individuals that we're planning on trying to talk to.
mm-hmm.
They're like, when you see the interview with Alan Hires, they're going to be like, are you seriously asking these people these kinds of questions?
And I think that point of asking these type of questions, poking buttons, because let's all be honest, if I did an interview with Alan where I just came in and said, where were you born? Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Okay, who was relating to that? Texans don't even like Oklahoma. And so it's not like that, but here's where I don't think that I would get any credit. I don't think that there is a moment in there where I am gonna press. It's not that rough, but I think some people are gonna look at that and they're gonna say, what did you have to do that to an 86-year-old man for? And it's like, I'm not being rough, but let's not forget who I'm talking to. This is a federal judge.
Yeah.
And this is the man who conducted the open forum. I don't think that he needs anybody.
A couple of thousand people could be in the open forum.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't really think that he would even think about this person coming from the peanut gallery saying, no, wait a minute. And I will say this too, what you said about the mutual friend and the feeling of the Rubel Shelly debate. So this is just something that I don't like, and it's not because it's me. I'm saying between Alan and Rubel, they're both people. Like I'm saying, they're not just these figures that just get knocked around. They're people. And so Michael Wyatt said, he admitted, I haven't seen your Rubel Shelly interview. He said, but I did hear people say you weren't very hard on him. But the flip side of that is he wants me to be really hard on Rubel. And the flip side is, as I'm leaving Michael to go back into the building to interview Alan Hires, he says to me, I'm walking away, and he goes, be good to him. And to me, that is that's just absolute this is partyism.
Mm-hmm.
Beat up Rubel, be gentle on the federal judge. And I'm not trying to beat up on Alan Hires either, but it's like neither one of them needs help. They can hold their own. We all know that.
Well, just for perspective, for maybe someone who didn't see the other interview, the Rubel Shelly interview, and you're trying to decide whether to watch this one tomorrow night, and we describe Alan Hires as being the editor of Spiritual Sword. Guess what? Rubel Shelly was editor first. He was the editor of the Spiritual Sword first.
He was the co-editor.
He was the co-editor, and he was really the impetus behind the magazine actually even being published when it was published. And he followed Alan Hires as the preacher at the Getwell congregation.
Yeah.
He did not in any way diminish the radio broadcast. It was said of him that, and this is actually a quote, if there were anything that the elders had problems with Rubel Shelly about in the 1960s was that they had to hold him back from having debates. And what a statement. You know, you're holding a gospel preacher back from having debates in the 60s. The statement was he could have had a debate every week. So there is, you know, when you're talking about the relationship between these two individuals, and then Alan Hires, what did he say about his relationship with Rubel in those days? I'm the reason Rubel was here at Getwell. So they are like hand in glove. It just makes all kinds of sense to have the two of them. And who was the greatest nemesis for Rubel Shelly during the time frame when he was, you know, having problems with his doctrinal position? Alan Hires. So who could even get those two interviews? You know, most people say if you interview Rubel Shelly, you can mark it down. Alan Hires will not follow.
Well, when I came into the Getwell building, so just, you know, he had already said no. And then he told me when we were there at Getwell and we met him, he did say, I was, he said, a bit cranky. He said when I said no, and I don't know if he had even seen it yet or not. But when I met Alan Hires, and I had some old gospel advocates with me, had some old 1960s firm foundations with me, and it just as we're making introductions, and I told him, I said, I'm very serious about my research. And he said, oh, I can tell. He said, I watched the whole Rubel Shelly interview. He said, I can tell you're very serious. And really the only thing that was like a questionable with him doing it was, and I didn't know this, I had heard someone say he had bad knees, but when he got done preaching, he is a diabetic. And so the only question was, he said, let me tell you how I feel when I get done, and let me check my sugar. But it was like, he had seen it, and when we met in person, he had no problem entertaining the idea. Then, you know, he visits with a handful of people, and that took a little bit of time, and then he just says, yes, we'll do it.
Well, let me ask our audience this. If on Friday, Alan Hires, and I'm saying those of you who know Alan Hires, on Friday, Alan Hires tells you, I'm not going to sit down with you. And then he sees you on Sunday, and you're asking again, would you even do that? And so that's the way we operate.
And it was just like that. No on Friday.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, no on Friday, and under no he said, I watched it. No, I don't think so. And then we show up, and there's a little bit of legwork behind there that, you know, we're not going to divulge, but we show up, and it's not a friendly place for us.
Yeah, he was very friendly.
He was friendly
the whole time.
The atmosphere there was not a friendly place for us necessarily. And so we're up in an unfriendly place, and we're still taking another chance. Why do we take the chance? So that you can be the beneficiary.
So you mentioned that a while ago about if people attempted to ostracize us and we come in anyway. So I did want to say to the atmosphere of going in, there were a handful of people. It was like the Sunday morning. I think they were happy to see anybody coming in. But there was only one younger person there, and I think like he had this made up perception of us. So, you know, like anybody can read body language, you know, he was not at ease. And so he just said, I graduated from Freed-Hardeman College. And I said, and? I don't care. You got like a math degree from Freed-Hardeman?
Well, I will say this, Caleb, and this is something a lot of people don't know. We went to Freed Hardeman lectures, and we rented a U-Haul and put up a banner that covered the entire U-Haul, and it depicted the president of Freed Hardeman lectures being in a fight with young shepherd boy David, and the picture of the president of Freed Hardeman was Goliath. The face of the president, the local newspaper recognized the face.
Yeah.
So we actually went there and depicted their hero. The entire county, the editor of the newspaper said if he wanted us arrested, that we would be arrested in that county. And so that's what they saw, and that's how they visualize us. How dare you come in and make light of, the favorite son of that particular county. And so what we're basically saying to you is, we're not taking orders from anyone. We're basically looking at this. We don't have a vendetta. We're very happy individuals. Last month, our YouTube channel soared 480% more views than it has normally. We did that because we wanted to come into this year and have viewers that were excited about what's going on. We still have 89,000 people in the last 28 days that have viewed our YouTube channel. And so we're doing what we're doing because we think that we can benefit younger people, older people who are trying to decide what are we going to do. You're going to hear Alan Hires say, if you don't like the way things are being done in the congregation where you are, divert your funds somewhere else. And he is practicing what he's preaching, by the way.
Well, I just think that, and honestly too, some of these interviews, I don't necessarily think they could call it an agenda at this point, since like you said, it is both sides. It's Alan Hires and it's Rubel Shelly, and then also Alan Hires, and neither one Alan Hires or Rubel Shelly would necessarily care for Steve Wolfgang.
All right.
Moving in that direction, that's another personality where someone would say, I think the agenda is just to get perspective. And also, I would say this too, people are very unaware and I would say ill-informed to the idea of what's going on in the brotherhood. Like, just having events doesn't mean that we're doing anything. And I'm saying we got a lot of lectureships, we got a lot of these 3-day meetings, and
that's internal busyness.
And so, and I would also get it too, like there are some people that, as they would look at some of the fellowship discussions, they would say, I'm not disagreeing with you, but they're saying, I don't know where to even look. And I get it for some of them, like if I said, Google it, I don't even know what to Google. And so one thing, as we get kind of going on some of what the Alan Hires discussion took place, like I said a moment ago, he's a retired federal judge. He was in charge of the open forum. He doesn't need anybody's help. And, if you're looking at his collection of work, I would say the 3 topics that he talked about the most were the Holy Spirit, instrumental music, and then fellowship. And someone's going to say, restoration history, fine, that's in there too. But my thing is this, if you write the response, like he is the response author to Rubel Shelly, how do you spell fellowship, a reply to the teachings of Rubel Shelly on fellowship and unity, and then also when he was at the Denton Lectures in 1987, he covered 2 John 9 and 10, then he was talking about unity and diversity. So he is like one of the most prolific writers on the idea of fellowship. If there was anybody that I was going to talk to about fellowship from his that generation, then that's it. A lot of these other people who wrote books on it are dead. Goebel Music had a fellowship book. Robert R. Taylor had a fellowship book. They're dead. And Curtis Cates, he had his red book on fellowship. Well, he's dead. So who am I going to talk to? Because most of the people right now are not even wanting to turn that rock over.
And some of the ones that we might want to talk to, we've already been declined by David Brown.
Yeah.
And, just for perspective, when I talked to David Brown personally, and I began to talk to him about my time frame with Curtis Cates, he actually said, had I known your position about Curtis Cates, then I would have withdrawn from you. But he had to then admit that my position was in fact right. I knew more about Curtis Cates than he did at the time. And it's just like, some of these individuals are so like self-absorbed that they think that by refusing to be in a situation like this because somehow or other is going to give us approval. This doesn't give us approval. Alan Hires, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't think any more of us and what we say about him in these discussions now and then playing the interview, it could diminish his appreciation. But as far as helping other people to see what's going on, I don't think it will diminish, that we're not going to hurt that at all. And so, for those who might end up watching it, someone will probably tell David Brown that's what I said, and that's fine. I think that he is cording himself off and maybe actually having an attitude that keeps him from getting to speak towards the last days of his life to a generation who might be wondering, why was
Which one? Rubel?
No, why was David Brown the way that he was? I mean, there are hardly anybody fooling with him at this point. The church where he preaches, it's splintered.
Yeah.
We know so many of the people that are in that congregation, he doesn't even realize that we do. For instance,
Well,
Jeff Litke,
yeah.
and just go on and on. And so you didn't hurt us one bit by saying no. You just made sure that you don't get a chance to actually speak for yourself and speak about things that happen, because we're going to end up doing the Gospel Journal, Dave Miller, just as a point. How many of you think that Dave Miller will sit down with Caleb and have an interview to answer some of the individuals, to give perspective on what happened at Brown Trail, what happened with Apologetics Press? How did Dave Miller single-handedly split up the Gospel Journal and pretty much take the president of the board and the vice president off into his camp and just scuttle the whole thing? That's very interesting that some people don't know how that happened.
Well, then, and I would be fine, I would enjoy that, Dave Miller. There's just, I don't really know that there would be anybody where someone would say, well, Caleb's going to hate this person so much, there's no way he could do it. No. And so when you said about David Brown, I don't understand why David Brown would say no, because I have been around David Brown and I've talked on various historical topics with him, and it's right into it. I don't know why he wouldn't want to do that. David Lipscomb College in Athens, Clay Poulius, there's a lot of people not going to know who that was, and he and I just were able to do that. James Bales, talking about James Bales at Harding College. But I would say this, there was another aspect. David Brown said no. So when we were at Get Well, Alan Hires is very friendly with me. This is just a thought that people need to just give it 5 seconds. Why is it that I can just unannounced drop in and say, does Rubel Shelly keep an office here? Ask him, would you like to talk about 1984, 40 years later? And then I see Alan Hires on a Sunday morning, and then he says, all he says is, let me check my sugar, and we'll see. Two total ends of the spectrum, Rubel to Alan Hires. And it's me talking to him. And then when I'm in Get Well, Keith Mosier bites my head off. And that's where I say someone who says, well, you're going to find someone that Caleb dislikes so much that he wouldn't sit down with him. I would sit down with Keith Mosier. I don't think Keith, and what Keith said was, stop talking to me. You make me so angry. I don't think that Keith could sit down with me, which is actually what he told us in class why he didn't debate Rubel in the 80s. He said, I can't control my temper, so I'm not going to do that.
But for those of you who are wondering how that ended, though, the last thing Keith said was, talk to me after.
Yeah.
So he was actually speaking at the Get Well lectures, and his parting words indicated that there might be some interest as far as him actually having an interview, because, look at the other players that are going to be involved. And then, when you're talking about Steve Wolfgang, do you want Steve Wolfgang to have the last word on what actually happened with, and I'm just going to say what they say, that group of individuals calls us liberals, and historically, everybody calls them antis. I call them forbidding brethren for my own self, forbidding where we're actually loose. But, you want them to have the last word? I doubt it.
Yeah.
And so there may come a time where you want to say something and we're going to be on to other people.
Yeah, and I do. There's another aspect of it too. Like I said, I called that partyism when Michael Wyatt said, "You weren't hard on Rubel. Be good to Alan." There's another aspect of it too, where I would say, for people who would like to say, "Well, I don't want Steve Wolfgang to get the last say," I think that they need to know who Steve Wolfgang is.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going through the Memphis School of Preaching, you need to know who Steve Wolfgang is. You need to know who Ed Harrell is, and you need to know who Melvin Curry was. Melvin Curry has died. And it's like, if you're going to say, "No, I'm not going to read any of their stuff," then why would you ever ask them to read any of, quote, our stuff?
Yeah.
And I also don't like that language either. Their stuff, our stuff.
You'll never actually know who you are historically. You might just say, "Well, I don't need to know anything. I obey the gospel and I'm a member of the Church of Christ." You have no idea where you actually came from. You don't know why you behave the way you do. I mean, there are people that they watched the interview with Rubel Shelly, and they're like, all we ever heard was just, he's the devil, or he's just, the worst. It was crazy, the young people that end up saying the things they saw, and they said, "We have been misled." Does that mean that Caleb brought Rubel Shelly back into the fellowship? No. But to not know that he wrote more books than, when we start talking about him being an author and the things of that nature, Alan Hires doesn't even get close to Rubel Shelly. Neither do any of your favorite preachers.
Yeah. Or the amount of debates either. That's another thing too that I don't care for. This is what you were saying earlier, a little bit of it. It's like, one moment I'm too hard on anybody, and that's what, "Caleb, I don't know why you are the way you are." But then I start like saying, "Hey, maybe we should give like a little bit more credit." And then they start, "I don't like who you're giving credit to." So, and that's the thing too about, there's going to be this moment that we're going to have here. We're going to play the clip tonight. Even the interview is tomorrow night. I think it will be the exact reverse of what you just said with the Rubel interview, that a number of people, I would say the bulk of people, came in and they said, "We never heard a good thing about Rubel. And now all this stuff is on the table that we saw he did in the 70s. And I think that there's going to be a moment in the Alan Hires interview that will be the reverse, where they will say, "We've only ever heard good things about Alan." And I'm saying Alan Hires is going to very, very much contradict his 1985 book on fellowship. And I think that there will be people that will be so perplexed with that, they won't know what to do with the rest of the discussion. And someone says, "Well, why do that?" Well, certainly no one thinks that I came out and, like, he's 1986. I didn't come out and say, I'm gonna destroy Alan Hires. That's not what I'm doing. I wanted him to talk about 1973 Memphis meeting with the Herald of Truth, and I'd tell you, he just started divulging stuff that I knew, didn't necessarily have plans to start talking about it. But I would say that for people who are going to watch the Alan Hires interview tomorrow night, if you're going to watch it, I do think that that moment will be so off-putting.
Well, what will be off-putting is alumni from the Memphis School of Preaching. You have a whole segment of the Memphis School of Preaching from 1966 up to 1980. They would all be persons who were in a school where they perceived, and I'm not taking sides on this, I'm saying I've heard it both ways, they perceived that the person that they revered the most in the Memphis School of Preaching historical picture, they're going to hear that he wasn't who they thought he was. And it's like, you didn't ask for that, really, did you? He
No.
said that in a sermon before we ever even got to the back room.
Right.
He basically preached it'll be his last sermon at the Getwell Church of Christ. And he chose to actually debunk one of the most favored stories and historical pieces of information that there really is in association with the Memphis area.
Right.
He just basically debunked that. And it's on tape. I mean, it's on DVD.
And really, of the number of things that we talked about, I think that he had this moment. This is not even what I was talking about, where I said there's going to be a moment that's going to be very perplexing.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a moment where, you're going to look at that, you're going to watch the whole thing, you're going to say, I I think that the hardest group that Alan Hires went on was the Memphis School of Preaching. It's like, because he and I are going to talk about
Yeah.
Lipscomb College and Pepperdine.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, somehow, Memphis is the one that got beat up the most. So I want to do this with everybody, like just some perspective on Alan Hires. For me, when I was going into school, not a lot was, and it's, not a lot was being told to us about Alan Hires. We doing okay? Not a lot was being told to us about Alan Hires, but I would say that your perspective going into school was a lot different. So we had this last time, but this is just, to let everybody think about it. This is you and John Shannon, the Memphis School of Preaching paper, Yoke Fellow. This is 1988. So before you went to Memphis, how did you even end up being at the Get Well lectures?
Well, really, my introduction to Tennessee as a whole was by, as a result of an individual named Goebel Music. Many of you remember Goebel Music. Goebel Music came to Clarksville, Texas. He held a meeting. It had been scheduled 10 years before. Nobody even really knew him or knew about him except one of the elders that had seen him somewhere or heard him somewhere and asked him would he do a meeting. So 10 years later, he is going to do the meeting. I'm a young Christian, just newly married, been married for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I basically realized during that meeting that I wasn't really doing anything for the cause of Christ. And he actually, was talking to me about my life and my wife's life. We both responded to the invitation during that and said we're going to be more faithful. And the subject came up. Why don't you check out Memphis School of Preaching? Well, I wasn't checking out Memphis School of Preaching, but I did, want to go to the lectureship that's in Memphis, and that was the Get Well lectures. So a friend of mine that I was working with, we had a business together, we both went. He was the same thing, feeling the same way, maybe 5 years older than me. We go to the Get Well lectures, and the first lecture that we walked into, Alan Hires is preaching. And so, the first thing I heard out of Alan Hires' mouth was Rubel Shelly, 1985.
Yeah.
It was raging.
And what was the line like? And this is my thing about the history of it all. So when you go in and your introduction to Get Well lectures in Tennessee and Alan Hires, do you remember like the big line he was saying?
Yes, I remember Alan Hires just grasping the pulpit, leaning into it, and just scorched earth on Rubel Shelly and bringing up, a person that probably brought up everybody's memory that was in 1985, and you had a lot of old people up in there. I'm 25, and for them to hear him connect Rubel Shelly with Carl Ketcherside, boy, you just can't. Can you make it any harder than that?
Now, no. And so this is the way that you said that. This is now like what I'm feeling, and I'm saying and I didn't think about asking him this, which is the nature of interviews. What if Alan Hires, like he had this line of saying, it might be the pen of Rubel Shelly, it's the mouth of Carl Ketcherside. That line was everywhere. He wrote it. It was in Contending for the Faith. If he said it from the pulpit, whatever. But what if I could say to Alan Hires, how would you have felt in 1985 when you told everybody, Rubel Shelly just repeating Carl Ketcherside, and then everyone in the audience said, who's Carl Ketcherside?
Yeah.
I never heard of him.
Yeah.
I never heard of Mission Messenger. And it's like that. It comes to a point where you are trying to just give out information, and the people just consistently say, I don't know who that is.
Well, here's the amazing thing as you say that, Caleb. As we're talking to individuals tonight, and I'm saying I hate to say this on an interview that's about to come up, or a pre-interview show that's about to come up, but of the two individuals that people know the most between Alan Hires and Rubel Shelly, it's hands down Rubel Shelly.
Yeah.
They made him a household word. Regardless of what you know about him, everybody knows about Rubel Shelly, and they're naming Rubel Shelly anytime they want to kick somebody.
Yeah.
It's Rubel Shelly and Max Lucado. And then, I'm just saying, he's not the hero, but he certainly is the villain that everybody knows his name. And then you're putting this back up, and everybody's saying, wow, I never would have known this. We're bringing in Carl Ketcherside for other individuals that are still alive long enough. And if you're 70 and up, for sure you would know Carl Ketcherside. If you're, further down, you're probably not going to know. But that to me is, an amazing thing. Hardly anybody knows Alan Hires today, but all of the preachers, young and old, know Rubel Shelly.
Yeah.
And I would say that's one of the reasons that a lot of people watch that interview. It's like, man, I can't believe Caleb Robertson, is he going liberal? He is actually interviewing Rubel Shelly. How did he get in with Rubel Shelly? And now you're bringing the other side of the picture, and we're hoping, we're hoping that people will start doing their historical stuff. And by the way, we bought $1,000 worth of Rubel Shelly's books, and you might be saying, well, why in the world would y'all do that? You need to realize that this was a very squeaky sound individual in the 1960s, in the 1970s. He was debating. He was just having gospel meetings everywhere. Young people loved him everywhere. And he has 15 or 20 books that we actually have, and they are excellent.
Yeah.
It is a crying shame. I mean, literally a crying shame to have lost somebody who was such a soldier for the cross of Christ.
And even in the 80s, I mean, that's where it was beginning, and I don't think we talked about this last time. In the 80s, while people were beginning to become alarmed about him, in the same year, and I think it was 1982, so everyone's getting up about him in 1984. In 1982, he had just written a book on the Ten Commandments. He wrote a book on the Beatitudes, and it's like, those are still
Excellent.
good books. They just happened to be in 82, 84. And so, but I have a friend, and the way that he said it was, he said, it wasn't religious school, but he said, I was in school in 1984, and he said, and it just kind of came down the pike, we're done with Rubel, and he said, and everybody just done with Rubel. And he said, no, unless you were there, he said, or reading the papers, there wasn't any explanation. And so I can imagine a number of people just would have been accustomed to maybe buying his book when it came out, and now we're just not.
And in 1986, I was in the Memphis School of Preaching, living in Memphis, and it was all the rage, to bring up Rubel Shelly.
Yeah.
If you were going to be a preacher that was trying to let everybody know that you were going to be strong and you're going to really get the truth out, you hammer on Rubel Shelly and some other individuals, but he was the top of the list, particularly because of Memphis, his time frame in Memphis. And so, to me, trying to figure out what goes on, and it's, you young preachers, just different preachers, you can relate to this. You move into a town and you plan on staying there. Mm-hmm. Isn't it the case that you're trying to figure out why these family members, these people that are in congregation with you and their relatives go to a congregation across town? And people are trying to fill you in, and then you find out later they didn't even know what they were talking about, and that you maybe have more in common with the individuals that left the congregation than you're in than you do with the people that are in the congregation you're in. And it makes no sense not to know what is going on, especially with the cliche, if you don't know history, you are destined to repeat it. And we're giving you historical data that you'll not get anywhere else, because nobody else, number one, nobody else right now, Caleb, can get the interviews. And the reason you're getting them is because of all the reading and studying that you're doing on this old material. People call him all the time asking just all kinds of historical questions. Number two, nobody generally will sit down with somebody who knows they're going to ask them,
Yeah.
can you believe that he just asked me that? What was the last thing Alan Hire said?
Going out the door, it's all had been good and enjoyable, and out the door he says, be gentle. And I don't even think that, I still don't think that he felt that we had not been gentle.
No.
So, but there is perspective that has to be had, and I think there's commentary that has to be made. Otherwise, I think a number of people will watch it and they'll say, I never found that moment that Caleb was talking about. So I'm going to just go ahead and assume.
Well, let me say this as we're entering into playing some of this information. I absolutely loved Alan Hires in 1985. I still love Alan Hires. I don't have any problem with the things that he said about Rubel Shelly. Rubel was basically making moves and saying things that were confusing individuals. A lot of people thought that he was saying things that he really wasn't saying. But at the same time, I don't know if we were going to cover this or not, but I'll just put it out there. At the same time, he said some of the exact same things that N.B. Hardeman, who is revered pretty much by everybody, every young preacher was told to get Tabernacle Sermons, 1923 Tabernacle Sermon. N.B. Hardeman was saying some of the exact same things that Rubel was saying in some of the writings and some of the speeches that he was making.
I would say that in that discussion, Rubel was saying the exact same thing that Alexander Campbell was saying, which is something I asked Alan Hires about. And for people who would know, Alexander Campbell had a series of papers that were called the Lunenburg Letters, and I asked Alan, what is the difference in the Lunenburg Letters, because Alexander Campbell continues to be praised, and what Rubel was saying in the open forum. And so that's a question that needs to be asked, and I get to ask Alan Hires that, and then he gets to have feedback. And I knew, he asked me, and I knew he had written articles on the Lunenburg Letter before I got there.
Well, also, as Alan was talking about the Shelly family, you just don't fake the emotions that came forward.
Yeah.
And so he's, for a person who would love, Michael Wyatt, actually, I asked him flat out, wouldn't you like to see Rubel Shelly return? And it was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And Alan Hires would not feel that way.
I don't, and I think that that's that's a bad thing. Is there would be people who would be watching from a distance, and they would say, well, this is probably how Alan feels about Rubel.
Mm-mm.
And it's like, that's just how you're feeling, and you don't even know anybody in the story. And I think there may be some stuff that Alan Hires says about he and his relationship directly to Rubel, where Rubel might say, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's going to create animosity.
Well, he didn't think that Rubel really had anything for him, but it wasn't something he was happy for. Well, you know what, I could care less about him, and he probably don't care about me. I'm saying it was very emotional. If you hadn't, managed the interview the way you did, it would have been a moment where you had to stop
And,
for him.
Right. And I kind of feel like that's where I am. I'm not saying I have nearly as an intimate relationship as a lot of these people do, but it's like I can have some levels of appreciation and then just say, but I don't agree here.
Mm-hmm.
And I might say, and this is where the disagreement becomes so big I can't work in worship. So, but what I said to Rubel was I don't like the viciousness that comes with a lot of it. And also too, there's a bunch of stuff that people are not going to take the time to look at. There was someone in the Freed Hardeman audience that got the microphone after Rubel Shelly did, and they said, Rubel, why didn't you just change and not tell us? And it's like, what's this guy saying? That's subverting, rather than Rubel just saying, I am looking at some stuff differently. There's a dude who was against Rubel takes the mic and said, why didn't you just kind of keep it to yourself and trick us? And it's like,
Slither on out.
Yeah, who let that guy get the microphone? Well, this is, I was going to say this a moment ago. I'm going to go ahead and assume that a lot of people have not read this book. And, I think a lot of people didn't read Rubel Shelly's book to begin with. So I would imagine that this is something that people bought on the party line. They bought it because it was party line, and they just said, yeah, I've got it. But when they go in and they start looking at it, this is very early on. And I would say this, for people, we all know we're having the fellowship conversations, and people are just not paying attention to it. But these are like the immediates, used to be the immediates of fellowship. Alan Hires notes them as this. He says, fellowship, koinonia, is going to be communion, the Lord's Supper, community of goods in which disciples shared, contributions such as given to the poor saints at Jerusalem, and then he says cooperation, such as extending the right hand of fellowship. And then he says this, in all these uses of the word, the basic idea is participation, joint participation, when joint participation is present. And I said, if you read I Just Want to Be a Christian, Rubel Shelly's book, he calls it that. It's joint participation. Alan Hires gives a quote by H. Leo Bowles, where he says this, it is unfaithful and disloyal to Christ to tolerate these people in worship. It is wrong to encourage and fellowship those who walk by opinions. It is cowardly and rebellious to refuse to oppose them. And so that in the fellowship conversation has been consistently what we have been saying. When you come across these things that you would actually call false doctrine, and you knew that the false teacher was in the room, did you say anything? And it's never the place. That's the consistent answer. It didn't feel like it was the time or place. Well, if I'm going by H. Leo Bowles' quote, which Alan Hires thought enough of, it's always the time and place. because he says right there, it's cowardly to refuse to oppose them. There's no caveat about time or place. And so this is, obviously, Alan Hires feels good about this quote because it's in the book. And this is the idea that he's writing against. It's the pen of Rubel Shelly. It's the mouth of Carl Ketracide. And he quotes right here, he's talking about Carl Ketracide, false concepts of fellowship. In recent years, there has been a fellowship movement at work for the avowed purpose of bringing together all who profess to believe in the restoration of the New Testament Christianity. The design of these efforts, however, is not to resolve differences or to call men back to the Bible, but rather to have unity and diversity. This is unity in spite of all the differences that may exist between us. It says, in effect, that our differences don't make any difference. And then he goes on to this point, and I'll zoom out just a little bit. He called the position, Carl Ketracide, he says, Carl Ketracide called the position unity and diversity, or fellowship without endorsement. And so my thing is, I'm 30, and I don't know how old everybody is, but I'm saying, I think there are some men who are in between our age groups. They're slightly younger than you, but slightly older than me. And I'm hearing them talk against unity and diversity, and I'm saying, like, y'all keep using that phrase, I don't know that you know what it means. Because they are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and even if they wouldn't say the words unity and diversity, they are openly saying it's fellowship without endorsement. When they go and share the pulpit, like I'm saying, conversations that have been had of people like Denny Petrella, Steve Higginbotham, B.J. Clark, the consistent answer is, I don't endorse what these people are saying. I don't know what they're saying. That is straight Carl Ketracide. Like, when you start talking about saluting a flag, every time that I have heard these folk, whether it be B.J. Clark, Denny Petrella, or Steve Higginbotham, or those styles of individuals, when they say, oh, I mean, I'm there. I don't endorse what they do. I mean, I don't endorse the stuff that I know they wrote. That is saluting Carl's flag. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Denny Petrello, in a letter that he wrote to a friend of ours in Bangkok, Thailand, he actually said in the letter, I laugh at even saying this, the idea that I'm in fellowship with the people that I'm with at the Tulsa workshop. And he said, I don't have fellowship with these people. And the thing about it is, I quoted that line back to the guys that are running the Tulsa workshop in the 80s, in the 90s, when Larry West was going back and forth and doing his We Care campaigns. And, you know, one of the individuals, Terry Rush, was like, if Larry West is saying that he's not with everything that's going on over here, he said, are we hurting his ministry? I mean, he really was affected by that. Now, Marvin Phillips wasn't affected. But can you imagine what, now he's passed, OCU, Stafford North. Can you imagine what Stafford North would actually say if he had heard Jay Lockhart talking about all these people that were on Oklahoma Christian? He said, I'm not going to hunt down Royce Money. I'm not going to hunt down Jerry Rushford and tell him all the things. I don't even know. He said, I don't even know where Acapella was. And it's like, Stafford North actually questioned whether or not that he was distancing himself. Jay Lockhart. Yeah. When he was told that, he said, well, is Jay Lockhart distancing himself? Well, it sounds like it, but really that's Carl Ketracide.
Right. And
I'm actually fellowshipping without endorsing all that y'all do. And they have this little thing about, I don't even agree with myself. Do you know the definition of that? That's schizophrenia. Yeah. You know, if you really want to get down to it, you keep pressing that. You're two people up inside there.
Or I was leaking of cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance is the beginning of, if you keep it up, you become a schizophrenic.
All like those, and that was something else that you said too about Terry Rush, Marvin Phillips. One has a feeling, the other one doesn't. But that's my problem is, and I'm going to have a quote tomorrow night from Alan Hires where he says, this isn't like he's talking 1980s. And Alan Hires says, this isn't a unity movement. This is a fellowship movement. He said, all they want is to get us in a room together. He said, they don't care if we actually think alike. And what he said in the 80s is how I feel about what a lot is going on. And I'm not even like in these scenes, you know. What I'm saying is, I see it from a distance. It's like y'all don't like each other. You don't agree, and if I'm looking at it and I'm saying you don't like each other, because they will throw each other under the bus. I don't know him. Like, you certainly aren't taking up for him. So they don't like each other. They don't agree. Well, then what's y'all's like binding element? Money. Number one, you're getting paid to do a meeting, or you represent an institution and you're over here to rub elbows to maybe get money for your institution. And so that's the stuff I don't like. And young guys think they want that. They don't.
Well, when you talk about not liking each other, we came back to the United States in 1996, and by 2000, I had stopped going to lectureships completely. And the reason why is because, you know, you have this room where you can sell books or whatever, and then you got your donuts and all that kind of stuff, and people are milling around, and they see each other, and they go off together. Hey, hadn't seen you forever. You go off together, and what happens is they begin to talk about different things that are going on in the brotherhood, and then next thing you know, it's like I told him, and it's just like this, these gory war stories, and that's how you elevate yourself. I really didn't have any war stories that I wanted to share.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of my constants was I don't enjoy going off a battlefield with my sword sticking out of anybody. You know, I'm in the soul-saving business, not the destruction. And I just, you know, I had no taste for it whatsoever. So by 2000, we're not going to lectureships at all.
And I think, too, like if someone heard you say that and they say, well, what do you want? Well, number one, my take on that is I would like to have fewer lectureships and more real gospel meetings.
Those guys that are doing lectures,
Yeah.
if they're such, you know, great speakers, I wish they would come here and present the gospel to the lost people on television. You can be on television anytime during the 2 weeks in June. If you can put together a lesson that can arrest the thinking process of the confused denominational world, sectarian world, you are our person.
Yeah.
You find your way up here, because if we're buying TV airtime, I guarantee you we don't have the money to be paying for all of your expenses. And if the congregation where you are thinks that much of you, I know they help individuals go to lectureships. And so get some of the individuals that are paying you at lectureships, see if they would send you up here, help us out with lost people. I guarantee you'll feel better about yourself than you will at a lectureship, because all you're going to get is glad handing at a lectureship, because it's us few and nobody new. Here, I mean, we've got people right now that are calling us and writing to us on a regular basis. How do we get involved in the tent? We're door knocking. I had a guy told me he was door knocking in Cuba, and he can't get anything done in the United States because he just can't seem to, you know, work it out.
I believe that.
And so,
I believe it.
and so he's coming to the tent this year, which the tent is third Monday in June, and then we end up going for the rest of the month into July.
The other thing that I was going to say about, number one, I'd like to have less lectureships and have more real gospel meetings. The other thing that I was going to say about it is, like, someone says, well, Johnny didn't like the war stories, and you're also saying that more false teachers need to be called out. So let me really say this about, and not just because it was Rubel Shelly, but Alan Hires giving Rubel Shelly at least 10 minutes, that's a good thing that he did. And so the flip side of it is...
and it went longer than 10 minutes by the time it's all said and done.
Right. And so my thing is, I don't have a problem with them getting to voice their idea. My thing is I want the dialogue. And so the other personality, and I'm saying down in Denton, Texas, so Leroy Garrett lived in Denton, Texas, and he would go to the Denton lectures, and they'd just be calling him out. He's sitting right in the audience. And my question is, you know, did anybody say, we're going to give him 10 minutes? And some Denton lectures, they would invite people they disagreed with, and then they'd be having it, I don't know where if it's like in a smaller auditorium or what. No. But it was, like I'm saying, Dan Billingsley would have been there, Lewis Hale would have been there.
They got the main crowd.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the way to do it. So that's a really big plug to Alan Hires. And so, but when you watch the interview, I think now, let me look at this. Would you be fine to play a lengthy clip of Alan? So you get the book, and these are going to be like the classic ideas. It's joint participation. And 1985, they're writing about Rubel, different people that he was beginning to associate with. I think Rubel went to Pepperdine in 1983, maybe, and they did not like that. But when you listen to the audio or the video with Alan Hires. This is for my producer, this is the shorter one. He's going to talk about a man named Lynn Anderson. And I recognize there's going to be a number of people who won't know who Lynn Anderson
Well,
is.
if you prep it, everybody's going to know who Lynn Anderson is.
Well,
You want to, like his famous statement, or you going to let him say it?
he's not going to say it here,
Okay.
but I am going to have after this
Okay.
the information on Lynn. So here's what he says. That
Probably.
that a month ago we were saying these people can't be fellowshipped. We're going to cut the funds to their program, but now I'm going to go share the pulpit with them in fellowship.
By the way, a couple of years before he died, Lynn Anderson came to see me.
Okay.
Came to our house here in Henderson. And he was with great-grandson of T.B. Larimore, who's another friend. And I took them to Stantonville, Tennessee, to the grave of Larimore's mother. And they'd never been there, didn't know it was there. One of them, it was his great-great-grandmother. But anyway, I thought Lynn moderated some in his later years. I could be mistaken about that, but
Well, that
was my feeling.
Okay, well, that would be a question of when he came to visit you, I didn't know, would you think you'd be able, the question would be, if you can't worship and work with Lynn Anderson, how could you have that company with him when he came to see you?
Well, he knocked on my door.
And just said, can you take us up here?
Well, he just, at that time, he'd been diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, okay. So now, who is Lynn Anderson?
You know, just on that statement right there while I was listening to the whole thing about, do you know who Lynn Anderson is? You know, if you don't know these people and you have the opportunity, you know, I question whether you're going to be in heaven. Because these people are going to be in heaven. I want Lynn Anderson to be in heaven. I worry about Lynn Anderson. Lynn Anderson's famous statement was, the Church of Christ is one big sick denomination, and he said, I do mean denomination.
He said, I mean every word.
Yeah.
Big, sick
Right,
denomination.
And so, you know, I just, as far as being famous, that was as famous as anything Rubel Shelly ever did. And maybe it's because I'm from Texas, you know, and he was over at the Highland Congregation in Abilene.
Yeah.
My wife went to Abilene University. Her sister, older sister, Christy, went to Abilene. So, you know, I may know that.
It's not regional,
Yeah.
like what you just said. He's from Texas, and Lynn Anderson was working he was the preacher for the Highland Congregation. So this is a book, it only came out a couple years ago, and it's Jack Reese's book called The Blue Hole. And he's going to describe, like, when you said that maybe it's regional, maybe I was down there and that's why.
Yeah.
So here's Jack Reese's notes on Lynn Anderson. Lynn Anderson was the preacher at Highland. Highland was in charge of hosting what was called Herald of Truth radio broadcast. Herald of Truth then turned into a whole television broadcast that was carried by 2 out of the 3 national broadcasting companies, American broadcasting companies in the 70s. And this is what Jack Reese says. In 1971, when Anderson was appointed Highland's preacher, he was relatively unknown in the United States. That obscurity would not last long. For one thing, the Highland Church of Christ was one of the most influential congregations in the fellowship. Whoever preached there would likely be well known, no matter what. That Anderson's preaching was utterly captivating, did not hurt, of course. Highland's influence over the years had come, among other reasons, because it was the primary supporting church for the most prominent para-church organization among churches of Christ at that time, the Herald of Truth, whose main focus was mass media evangelism. This organization received financial support from churches of Christ all over the world. It had global impact, therefore it bore global scrutiny. But Anderson's growing reputation emerged not so much because of where he preached, but how. I was a college student in Abilene when he first arrived. My classmates and I were electrified by what we experienced. We had never heard expository preaching before, not like this. He worked out of single texts each week, examining entire books of Scripture in context. More than that, his language was accessible, his stories engaging, his manner charming, his humor wry, his effect powerful. I don't doubt that at all, that was the first time they ever heard expository preaching. I mean, it would be nothing for young guys to be growing up anywhere at that time frame and say, I can't tell you how many 40-minute talks we've heard on just raw data. I could have just read that at home.
Yeah.
I could have just read this handful of however many scriptures that we got zero context to in any discussion about. So I don't read this and just think, that this is necessarily going to be awful because this person doesn't represent Memphis or even Freed Heart or anything of that nature. But now, you got anything else?
Well, I'm thinking about, as you read that, I'm thinking about Alan Hires seeing Lynn Anderson at his house. He and Lynn Anderson went to school together, Freed Hardeman, and you have this description of an individual. And, I just don't know why, I have some questions about Alan and his fellowship positions in that story that is going to be depicted in the interview, more of it, because I have associations and with friends that are captivating, that are energetic. Let's just name one. I shouldn't have said that. Gospel of Christ.
Kevin Pendergrass.
Kevin Pendergrass. Kevin, I didn't forget your name. I have this bad habit of saying something that goes out of my mind. I still have association with Kevin Pendergrass, and individuals might say, "What in the world are you doing talking to Kevin?" Kevin was one of the most engaging, energetic, evangelistic, love souls young preacher that I have met so far. And when he would come, all you had to do is ask him to come, and he had the funds. He would raise. If he didn't have the funds, he would raise the funds to come here, be on television, preach at a tent, go out and door knock, and just make everybody feel better because he had been there. And so, when you're talking about Alan Hires' relationship with Lynn Anderson, I hate being in a position to have to say to him, did you do something to make Lynn Anderson question where he was going to be? If he didn't question, he had cancer supposedly.
Yeah.
I know he did have cancer, but I'm saying the time frame that Alan was talking about. These, we just can't go around just being these monsters that have no feeling about these individuals that we're talking about. Did you hear people say when he said T.B. Larimore, who's T.B. Larimore? Can I say it again? If you don't care about these individuals, I don't think you're going to be in heaven with these brethren, because these are individuals who made it possible for you to be where you are.
Absolutely.
If you're a gospel preacher, for sure. And so,
well, when you said this part about the bringing up Kevin, and I asked that to Alan Hires, I said, you can't work and worship, like he would say he can't work and worship with Lynn Anderson, but you just company with him.
Yeah.
And so, that's the big thing too when we talk to preachers now, and it's like they say, well, yeah, I shared the pulpit with him, but then I got on the plane and I left. What they're trying to tell me is there was no company.
Man.
And there's a part of that where I don't know. I will say this. I think that this type of activity goes on where I think preachers and I would say brotherhood speakers, they do what they want and then they tell other people something different. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, you might be saying, well, I would maybe go around with so-and-so, and this, we're talking about fellowship. And they said, but I don't know that I feel comfortable keeping company with them. And then you find out, well, Alan Hires gave a whole guided tour of Henderson too. And this is my big thing too. Here they both are young in 1973. And Alan Hires, I will say this about Rubel Shelly and Lynn Anderson. So the thing that everybody was upset with about Rubel in 1984 and 83 was he started to say what, a ton of people before him said. He said, I'm going to call these people in the Christian church brethren. And he said, and if a congregation uses the instrumental music, he said, I'm not going to have membership there. He said, but I'm not going to not call them brethren if they have obeyed the gospel. So that's what his thing was. The piano in the Christian church. Where Lynn Anderson was the preacher at Highland and Abilene and Herald of Truth, they had people in Bible class, in the congregation in Bible class, speaking in tongues. Rubel was not doing that in 1983, 84, 85. And it's how does it become that he is this worser figure when he wasn't saying, hey, let's all...
Lynn Anderson.
Yeah, let's all, tongue speaking maybe, and I've said this already, Pat Boone was behind a lot of that. And so Pat Boone speaks in tongues in his Beverly Hills kitchen. Then you got people in Bible class at Highland doing it. And on Herald of Truth, they started praying for help from the Spirit. You know, the Spirit's going to help us directly. Open your hearts, open your ears, going to help us as the speaker. And they all just had, like I'm saying, a bulk of the charismatic books that James Bales wrote were pointed at Highland and Abilene.
So, as you're saying that about, you just made me think, Rubel Shelly attended the same congregation as Alan Hires.
Get well.
No, I'm saying in the past, not too long ago, he actually
Yeah.
came to the congregation where Alan Hires attends in Henderson, Tennessee. And Alan's statement about that was the roof didn't fall in, the roof didn't cave in. But here's my thing that I was thinking. What would you think if you heard that Rubel Shelly was there on a Sunday night, and he was, where Alan Hires was attending, and let's say that they got together and you saw them going off somewhere, and you basically said, Alan Hires and Rubel Shelly left the building together, but later you were learning that, we saw the emotion associated with the Shelly family, but you're learning that this was a time where Alan Hires could talk to Rubel Shelly about his soul. Why would you scoff at that, and why would you even scoff at the possibility? What do y'all think y'all are doing with these interviews and talking to these people? What do y'all think y'all are doing, actually sentencing all these people to hell when their life is not over?
Right.
I know God is not sentencing these people to hell when their lives are not over, especially given everybody that's listening to us who's a member of the Church of Christ. If you've been to any Bible school, any Bible Sunday school, I'm saying, you will know who King Manasseh is at some point. One of the most hideous, just has the most awful reputation at one point in his life, and he ends up humbling himself before God. And it's just amazing. It really comes down to that statement about, I heard Caleb Robertson is really talking a lot about grace. Martinsville Church of Grace up there, they are really discussing grace a lot. I hope that you recognize that you need the grace of God, and if you really think about it, your prayers hinge on your willingness to forgive other individuals. I know brethren that laugh at Catholics when they start getting in a plane crash or something like that, and they start praying, Our Father who art in heaven, and they're like, why are they praying that prayer? Why aren't you?
Yeah.
Because, one segment of that prayer is, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others. And some of the members of the Church of Christ are the most unforgiving people, I think, in the world, and have all the reason to be the most forgiving people in all the world, given that you realize or believe that you have the truth. And so,
we have enough instances to reflect on, how people treat each other. So this is my thing. The reason that this whole quote is on the right side of the screen is Alan Hires certainly believed, this is what he says about E.R. Harper was being fired from Highland and Herald of Truth. And he said, I believe, from what I have read, that he was fired for opposing the tongue speakers at Highland. So, 1973, Alan Hires is totally on board against being Herald of Truth, or against Herald of Truth. And he had this to say. He said, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. So he was saying some action needs to be taken, and down here, this is, if you can see that, maybe not. He's writing to Ira Rice, signed, faithfully yours, Alan Hires. But the problem is, you read all this, you see how all the activity happened. His statement about Lynn Anderson, he said, I think Lynn moderated in some of his later years.
Okay, well, that would be a question of, when he came to visit you, I didn't know, would you think you'd be able to, the question would be, if you can't worship and work with Lynn Anderson, how could you have that company with him when he came to see you?
Well, he knocked on my door.
And just said, can you take us up here?
Well, he just, at that time, he'd been diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, okay.
One of them, it was his great-great-grandmother. But
never
anyway, I thought Lynn moderated some.
So, in the fellowship conversation, because, Alan Hires wrote the book, How Do You Spell Fellowship? He said, I thought Lynn in his later days moderated some. So I know that Alan Hires wrote about that visit in 2014. Maybe I don't know that it happened in 2014, but he wrote about it in 2014. So This is Lynn Anderson in 2013. And I'm saying, y'all just think about the man who wrote the book on fellowship. Here's Lynn Anderson at the Lipscomb summer celebration in 2013. That is their lectureship. And so in 2013, Lynn Anderson is speaking on Lipscomb, which Alan Hires he said there are 3 liberal colleges, Pepperdine, Abilene, and Lipscomb. In 2013, Lynn Anderson was there with Patrick Meade.
Yeah, he's not moderating.
Yeah, he's not he's exactly 1973, Herald of Truth. Patrick Meade is the individual who said Lipscomb called and they said, we got a young minister, student, female, and Patrick Meade said send her, and it was Lauren King. 2013, Lynn Anderson, he spoke, shared the pulpit with Rubel Shelly. And so that's just where I come in and say,
Yeah.
how are we just continuing down this path where it's like we're playing this game of Rubel Shelley's on the outside? No.
Not for them.
Not for them.
Yeah,
They're
he's not saying no for
right.
us.
He's
on the
saying
outside.
Lynn Anderson moderated somehow. Lynn Anderson is still with Rubel Shelly, and Alan Hires is saying no to Rubel Shelly. I don't know if there's anybody else in here, maybe Patrick Meade again and Randy Harris, who's an Abilene character. I'm saying it doesn't take much effort at all. That's one thing that people do say to us is like, well, I don't have time to just do all this research. This is so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have figured that out just on a simple basis. Like you said, I don't even know who Lynn Anderson is. Well, you could have just stumbled upon Lynn Anderson from looking up Rubel Shelly in 2013. And then there's Alan Hires. And so here's the more lengthy clip. And here's the thing that we're all going to be having to have a moment of combating. Do we want to be consistent or not? And this is still, and that's a question I didn't ask him. Do you still agree with your book? Like I just said, I think people ought to look at it.
Yeah.
And he said, well, if they can find one. But it's a question of, do you still agree with your book? And so,
And we also bought all the books we could get of his.
Right.
Same time we were buying Rubel Shelley's.
and so I ask him about the whole Pepperdine scene. I tell him, last year there were 4 Pepperdine speakers on Freed Hardeman, and this is how the conversation goes.
Way of referring to it, he would say that he had little f fellowship with some people that he didn't have capital F fellowship with. So I call my little book, How Do You Spell Fellowship?
Right. Well, a question about it, and I don't know if you know, but at the beginning of our discussion, one of the 3 schools that you said had really drifted out to the left is Pepperdine. In February of 2023, the Freed Hardeman lectures had 4 Pepperdine speakers. Would you call that little F fellowship? That there's clearly a difference in beliefs, and yet they get to come have fellowship at the Freed Hardeman lectures.
I have no idea.
It would be Bruce McClarty, Noel Whitlock, Dale Maynor, and then a very young man named David Skidmore. But they
Well, I know 3 of the 4 you just named.
Okay.
And I wouldn't have a question about any of them.
Okay.
Bruce McClarty is back with Freed Hardeman.
Right. He's their minister in residence.
He was president of Harding.
Yes, sir.
And they dismissed him.
During kind of the COVID season.
Yeah, I
There.
think he didn't raise enough money is what I honestly
Well, during
happened.
that's what it was.
But he's a good man.
In 2012, I believe it was, he spoke on the Pepperdine lectures, and essentially because of his last name, when you look at their program, there's Bruce McClarty, and then there was a woman, and she's quite prominent in the Abilene community. Bruce McClarty, and then right beside him would be Amy McLaughlin. She's a woman preacher. So is it not a problem that he's going to speak out there and they've got women preachers on the program with him?
Not necessarily. You know, if I were invited to speak somewhere and had the opportunity to present truth, I wouldn't necessarily decline because there was someone on there that I didn't agree with.
And so she's going to call herself a member of the church. Bruce McClarty's a member of the church. Do you think he has any responsibility to speak out against their use of women preachers while he's there?
Everything depends on the situation, circumstances. Under some conditions, yes.
Okay.
Maybe under others, not so much.
Would you say that there might be some conditions where it would be uncouth?
I think Bruce McClarty is very conservative. I don't think his position would be in question.
Okay.
The fact that he was on the program with somebody who was otherwise would not necessarily implicate him.
Okay. Well,
Dale Manor, his specialty is archaeology.
right.
And his father was a friend of mine, Curtis Manor. Curtis preached in San Diego. I held a meeting with him out there. And I've known Dale most of his life, I guess.
Well, I knew their different backgrounds and associations, but that's something that I had seen and taken notice of was that they would frequent Pepperdine, and a lot of Pepperdine people now come to Oklahoma Christian. And so, but with this book turning...
I got criticized for speaking.
So, what Alan Hires just said about Bruce McClarty, I said Bruce McClarty is sharing the pulpit with a woman preacher. Does he necessarily have responsibility to say something while he's there? And Alan Hires said not necessarily. Different circumstances, different situations bring different circumstances that require different actions. So here's what I said earlier about H. Leo Bowles. H. Leo Bowles said, "It is wrong to encourage and fellowship those who walk by opinions. It is cowardly and rebellious to refuse to oppose them." That is from Alan Hires' book. And this is my thing that people are going to watch. I will be honest, the fellowship conversation doesn't come up to the end of the interview. I do think that people will love the first 80%. But I think that when they hear Alan Hires say you can share the pulpit with a woman preacher and say zero about it, all that work is going out the window.
Yeah.
And it just basically came down to Bruce McClarty shared the pulpit with a woman preacher and he said zero. He said zero about it. And then Alan just said, "I think Bruce McClarty's a good man." Well, wait a minute. I think Rubel Shelly is a good man. But we have had numerous books written about his positions that get dissected. Why? I bet Bruce McClarty is a good man. He shared the pulpit with a woman preacher at Pepperdine and said zero about it.
And for Alan Hires to actually say that, given that he's written a book about Big F, Little F fellowship, this is the exact explanation of that bad behavior. You actually can continue to fellowship these people, and you don't get to say that Bruce McClarty was not in fellowship with these people. And the reason I get to say that is because the very same people come to Harding where Bruce McClarty was the president. It is a liberal cesspool. And people in Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, neighboring states to Harding would be appalled if they had known that if, let's say, 15 years ago, if he was saying the very same thing about people going to Abilene and people going to Pepperdine. I'm saying the heartache and the disappointment associated with children going off to Harding University, in the 80s is just, you can't quantify how badly people were feeling. And, I know elders, there was an elder at the Fisher Street Church of Christ in Greensboro Road.
Arkansas?
Yeah, in Arkansas. What's the name of that town?
Bay?
Jonesboro.
Oh, Jonesboro.
Jonesboro, Arkansas. I know one of the elders there that withdrew from his grandson, who went to Harding, involved with all these liberals in Harding, and Bruce McClarty is a rank liberal. I mean, he is just like I don't know why he's not in the class with Rubel Shelly.
He would be.
He would be in the class with Rubel Shelly. I mean, he was running with the rankest individuals. And David Shannon brings him over to Freed Hardeman. All of a sudden, he's a good guy. He is not a good guy. Freed Hardeman is way out left.
Yeah. And
Just
David Shannon
ridiculous.
went to Harding lectures with a number of Pepperdine speakers.
people.
So, I will say this too. In one sense, he does still edit the paper, but it's like someone says, good night. give Alan Hires a break for not knowing all these people. Well, wait a minute. He's not claiming he doesn't know. He's actively giving a plug based on what for Dale Manor I knew his dad. Well, you knew Rubel Shelley's dad. So
for you to say that Lynn Anderson has moderated, I have Texas again. Jay Lockhart is having, he had a television program down in Tyler, Texas, not far from 90 minutes from where I come from. He has Lynn Anderson on his television program. Lynn Anderson was way off into his liberal lifestyle at that time, and you just promote. Jay Lockhart has been on how many of the Spiritual Sword magazine?
Yeah.
He's been a feature in there. He is a liberal, big-time liberal, up in here with Royce Money, the past president of Abilene Christian, Jerry Rushford, even Earl Edwards.
Yeah, Jerry Rushford's the former director of the Pepperdine Lectures.
And just horrendous individual
So now
as far as the change agents in the Church of Christ.
Since you said Earl Edwards. So, I mean, you heard him say you could share the pulpit with a woman preacher at Pepperdine and it not necessarily be a problem. So, look, like I said, he's a retired federal judge. He was in charge of the open forum for a number of years. And even here, like, let's say this too, he is very sharp, okay? Like this, and I'm, if someone wants to say that, I didn't have the intention, this is a minuscule part of the interview, and I'd say this too, I had no idea he was going to say that.
I had no idea he was going to say that either.
Man, you can be at Pepperdine with a woman preacher not saying anything. I had no clue. Like sitting in this is the Get Well library, you talk about, deflated. So, but here's the thing. He's sharp. That was his take in the moment. He's obviously he's a Freed Hardeman fellow, right? Well, here's what's crazy. Here's other Freed Hardeman fellows. This is Earl Edwards, and here's his take on going to Pepperdine Lectures.
Not judge somebody by association. It's guilt by association because they appear.
Now, if somebody went to Pepperdine lectureship every year, I'd have very definite. In fact, if they even went one time, as far out as it is, I'd have questions about it. As I told Ralph Gilmore I wouldn't go. He didn't go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who's the other man talking? Was that Tom?
Yeah.
Okay. I never know how to say his last name if it's Childers.
Childers.
Tom Childers, he is telling Micah, Tom Childers says, you just can't go playing guilt by association. Right away, Earl Edwards has to say, well, if you're going to Pepperdine every year, then I'm going to have some questions. And then he says, and not even every year, he said, if you go one time, I'm going to have some questions. You didn't just go one time, Bruce McLarty. You shared, your name appeared right next to Amy McLaughlin. It's not just Earl Edwards, it's Milton Sewell. Listen to what Milton Sewell says about Jerry Rushford, who is the director of Pepperdine Lectures.
Dad about a teacher named Jerry Rushford.
But last year about using Jerry Rushford on the Oklahoma Christian Lectures, and I would say his comments were just about the same as you just made about yourself and Royce Money. And but it is causing quite a stir that Jerry Rushford is now being included in the name list. That would be too far for you, would it not? I mean, 32-year director of Pepperdine?
Sure. I never allowed Jerry to come when I was president here. I don't want that quoting, but he really wanted to come and present here, but I would not allow it.
So
that was an interview too.
Right.
I didn't agree not to quote anything that he said.
So, and I haven't had that happen. There wasn't anything that Rubel said, I don't want this on.
Yeah.
So, Milton Sewell, Earl Edwards was in charge of the Bible department. Milton Sewell was the former, I think, president of Freed Hardeman. Sometimes I get all these different terms between chancellor and emeritus, and I don't, but I will say this: he's very, very much in charge at FHU, and even he said Jerry Rushford very much wanted to come, and I would not allow it. And it is that Pepperdine stigma. He very much wanted to come to FHU. I wouldn't allow it. Well, when I talked to Alan Hires, it sounds like he's saying he should have got to come.
Well, I will say this, from the things that I'm reading of Alan Hires' published emails, I don't know how all that works over
Right.
on the Restoration website,
Yeah.
but Jerry Rushford is writing to Alan, and Alan's writing back to Jerry, and Jerry's coming to the lectureship,
Yeah.
and he's going to hobnob with, he's going to get on the bus. He's naming names, people that he's going to be with and visit with, and it's like, seriously, y'all, these are people that are in full fellowship with the Christian church. They are all kind of ecumenical right now. If you want to know what this leads to, the campus congregation at Pepperdine now uses instrumental music. It's called the Waves Church, at least it was. And these folk are way out. And the idea that they're coming to, even if they're not speaking at Freed Hardeman, but you're coming up to Freed Hardeman and you're going to hobnob with your old classmates and whatnot.
Right.
Seriously.
I mean, you may not be speaking, but there's still the aspect of keeping company, which is a New Testament idea, which will be taught in Alan Hires' book, How Do You Spell Fellowship? So when you look at all this, that's all I'm saying. What I said earlier is, do we want to be consistent or not? And right now, the answer is not. They don't. And so,
But the idea of, I will marginalize you if I decide to, and, I'd like to say, you're going to hear in the interview, and I want to make sure that you get this, that Alan Hires says that the Curtis Cates regime at Memphis School of Preaching is a moderate. They were moderates, and Brother Hearn's group were radicals, and they had a chip on their shoulder. Well, I can tell you what, I was in the moderate group, and this is exactly what I was taught. All this business about fooling around and hobnobbing with these liberals, absolutely not. Curtis Cates, he jacked us up, and the teachers that we had with Curtis Cates jacked us up against being involved with liberals and not saying anything. When I say liberal, that doesn't mean I hate them. I can give you a list of liberals that I have driven hundreds of miles. We drove 11 hours to be with Alan Hires, to be able to get to, and not even being told that you're going to get to have the interview.
Right.
And so those are love hours that we're talking about. We didn't go down there and scald anybody, but we're basically saying we're putting this together to be able to help you realize why it is that you're having such a difficult time.
Well, and this is, we have this as a PDF that we can share with people. And like you said, you were coming out of Curtis Cates' time frame. And so I'm going to have a name like I told you, and I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm going to have a slide with Edward Fudge, and I told Dad, no one's going to know who that is. And he said, people his age. He said, well, people my age will. And I said, no one else will. So here's Curtis Cates, right? You're going to school at Memphis in 1987, 88. And I just opened it up to page 53. It's not highlighted, but I'm just saying, Curtis Cates is talking about Edward Fudge. So the thing that gets me, this is the thing that gets me, is everyone is so wedded to their party, they don't read anything that Curtis Cates wrote. And I'm over here, like I said about Alan Hires. How would Alan Hires feel in 1985? It's the mouth of Carl Ketcherside. And everyone says, we don't know who that is. And it's like no one is keeping up with anything. All the while what you said. But they will circle anybody they want out. So,
well, in my time frame, Curtis Cates was chastising Leroy Brownlow. He was chastising Johnny Ramsey. The first person that I ever heard solve the problem of can one church withdraw fellowship from another was Curtis Cates. He wrote it in Lester Camp's book, a paper, I can't remember what it was, but I'm saying we were down in Detroit, Texas, and everywhere around us there were liberal congregations. They were fooling with Abilene. They were involved in the Boston movement, and it was just this big question at Brown Trail Lectures of whether or not they ought to withdraw from North Richland Hills. And they were actually hem-hawing around whether they could withdraw from a congregation that just is as far out as you could get. At least we thought that. Now they're further out than they were then. And Curtis Cates is saying absolutely one church can withdraw fellowship from another, putting scripture in it, and then I think really capping it by saying everybody withdrew from the Christian church in 1906, and even before and after, and they were brethren. I mean, we're all together before 1906, 1900s, and it just makes no sense to say that, oh, you couldn't withdraw from those brethren, even though they brought in a piano and whatever else, pastors and just all kinds of foolishness, and they're so far out now you wouldn't even recognize them. So.
Well, and then you know, Curtis Cates is obviously dead, so I mean his book is still around, but it's not like he's gonna have a place to say anything. And some people might say, well, even if he wasn't, he wouldn't say anything. Well, I don't know about that, but there are people still alive at the Memphis School of Preaching who certainly remember the days. It's like I still don't understand. We're on interview number 2. Fellowship is getting brought up again. I still don't know where Billy Bland is. Like, how is Billy Bland not just breaking forth of Memphis School of Preaching? Keith Mosier, same thing. It's unbelievable. And so, I mean, I guess that is the idea. So here's just another segment, and we'll start talking about this one, history repeating itself. So again, fraction of the interview with Alan Hires is the fellowship talk. I mean, that only lasts a couple minutes. Rubel Shelly is not going to get nearly as much conversation time as people would imagine. And I would say this. I went to see Alan Hires not to discuss Rubel, but to discuss the 1973 Memphis meeting with Herald of Truth. And this is a quote from Dub McClish, and this is why I wanted to do it. And Dub McClish, by the way, went to Freed Hardeman in 1955 with Alan Hires. There's a load of personalities who were there in 1955. But this is what Dub McClish said. This is a quote from 2005 timeframe. Dub McClish says, the political regime now reigning in our nation's capital sold its recent enormous bailout packages for various corporations on the basis that they were too big to fail. Could it be that some of these politicians learned the tactic from those who decided in June 2005 that apologetics press was too big to fail? And Dub McClish makes this quotation here, this parenthetical. Where are those brethren who in 1973 rejected this attitude toward Herald of Truth program, took in part in a marathon meeting that exposed its errors? Some of those who led the charge in that effort have adopted their very attitude towards apologetics press. When I started finding, and I didn't know that this quote happened per se when I was looking at 1973 meeting and Alan Hires and the other players. But as soon as I saw the 1973 Memphis meeting and I started then looking in more, and I knew that, and to my knowledge, Alan Hires is only one of 2 people who participated still alive. Sure, there were loads of other people. I don't know them. I don't know who they are. But if Rubel Shelly was there, he's the only other one, because Garland Elkins is dead and Thomas Warren is dead. Harold Hazelip is dead. So as soon as I saw Herald of Truth, 1973, immediately that's what I thought. This is the biggest institution that they had ever had. It was on national broadcast. Not everybody, somebody quoted, the elder at Highlands' name was Art Haddix. And they always said that Art Haddock's statistics for Herald of Truth were inflated. And they said they had this thing about something about a potato. You got a 6-pound mama potato birthing an 8-pound baby. And they would say that's always Art Haddock's statistics. Yeah. Whatever. He said for NBC, of all the national religious broadcasts, NBC had a number, and Art Haddix would say, and Herald of Truth is number 1. If that's true, that is incredible. Yeah. And so, but when they made their turn, and they started speaking in tongues in Bible class, and they started praying for direct operation of the Spirit, that is exactly as I'm reading all the papers, that's what I thought, this is too big. They're not gonna do anything with this. And Reuel Lemons took that side. He said all that Alan Hires' research and Thomas Warren and Garland Elkins, Reuel Lemons just said that's just rumors coming out of Memphis.
Well, you want to make a comparison. Apologetics Press, their annual funding when Dave Miller was over there, when all this was going on, was $1 million a year. $1 million is not even a drop in the bucket, and we're talking about way back when $1 million was a lot of money. These people in Texas that were funding, and then everywhere else as Herald of Truth really got going. When you're saying too big to fail, Apologetics Press is like, they're not even in the spectrum compared to the Herald of Truth. And these brethren took down the Herald of Truth.
Yeah.
you know? And so it is a shame, really, when you get to talking about this, that individuals would then not think that Apologetics Press should be taken down or should be handled. Too Big to Fail is not, you know, he's definitely right. Doug McClish, he's definitely right making the analogy. If they're willing to even think that they can manage or change Herald of Truth as big as it is, and they just went for it. You know, we're done with Herald of Truth, and they were done with Herald of Truth. And I really don't think that the church was hurt.
No, and that's another thing too. Like, since you said it that way, there's a people right now who would say, well, I don't think that we would say that about anything. There are people that will hear us say this, and they'll say, I can't think of anything that I would say, oh, it's too big to fail. We have to preserve this institution that doesn't even represent like a localized congregation. But that is exactly what they said about the Get Well congregation closing their doors. So in October 1st, 2023, they put this out on their Facebook page. The elders announced this morning that Get Well Church of Christ is closing. Our last day of worship will be Sunday, October 29th. Please make plans to join us on our last day. House to House, Heart to Heart will be taking over the spiritual sword. They will be continuing the lectureship in 2024. Details to be released soon. Please join us for the Spiritual Sword Lectureship October 15th, 19th through 23. There were hundreds of comments on this, and almost nobody said, like, what happens to Get Well?
Yeah.
Like, this is get well and done. What happens over here? What happens to the neighborhood? Everybody flooded the comments, and they said, what's going to happen to the paper? What's going to happen to the lectureship? They cared more about a lectureship than they did a local community having a local congregation of the body of Christ. So my point is, you all already think in these terms.
In the institutions, you got two institutions, the paper and the lectureship. And another institution picked them up.
Right.
Two institutions, Firm Foundation or whoever it is. I mean, what's the lectureship these days that's over in Chattanooga? I don't know. It used to be Firm Foundation, but somebody in Chattanooga, I believe it's East Ridge in Chattanooga, is going to be hosting the former Get Well Spiritual Sword Lectures, as if the spiritual sword is what we ought to be bemoaning and trying to get it going, and not the Get Well congregation. Yeah. And then House to House, Heart to Heart is going to take, and you heard how I said that. I think very little of House to House, Heart to Heart. It basically is a way that keeps you from ever having contact with the people that you're trying to reach. Let's let somebody in Alabama mail out to your neighborhood that you care about them, and they never will ever see you, and they're like, who is the Church of Christ? Now, House to Heart, House I know, but the Church of Christ?
Yeah. Sounds
like something that the demons would say in Acts 19. Paul I know, Jesus I know, but who are you?
Well, the thing, like when you said that and I laughed, the other thing about it is, if you just don't keep up with history, and you don't have nothing to compare it to. So when he says, I think very little of House to House, Heart to Heart, and I would say this, there's Lynn Anderson, and Lynn Anderson's co-worker's name is Landon Saunders. And in 1973, Landon Saunders had a 5-minute spot called Heartbeat, where he actually didn't use any Bible, but he would talk to the people about biblical morals without mentioning Jesus or any scriptures. And a bunch of people hated it because they said, this is way too dish rag. This is soft. And it's like, y'all just don't know that Heartbeat existed. Otherwise, you would be comparing it to
House to
Heart to Heart. And so that's the thing. It's like, again.
And he was phenomenally famous.
Yeah.
Landon Saunders.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff that happened. Like, obviously, I don't agree with the charismatic stuff.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to be beating up on Landon Saunders for doing Heartbeat. Yeah. You know, it's like you got all this time in the world, radio and NBC, and then he comes up with an idea where he says, let me talk to him about morals, and everybody griped at him. So this is something to think about, y'all, and this can start making a turn to making a wrap up. It'll be a driving home. You know, you have to ask this question, okay? And I'm sure that back in 1973, if anyone had said, you know, in 1970, 71, someone said, you know, in 1973, we're going to have a big old meeting, and it's going to be all about Herald of Truth, and they're going to be promoting, like, all this charismatic activity and speaking in tongues. There would be a bunch of people would be saying, oh, no, we're not going to do that. And the same thing leading up to 2000, early 2000s, with a transition from Bert Thompson to Dave Miller, there'd be a ton of people saying, oh, no, we're not going to have anything like that. And I'm not even saying that this is what's happening. Polishing the pulpit. But I am saying we do kind of have to start at least having a thought in our mind that it could be possible. Otherwise, if the day comes and no one's prepared for it, then what are you going to do? We have all these markers in our past of brethren looking at an institution saying, it's too big to fail, too big to fail. And this year, Polishing the Pulpit has announced that they're having a second. And I do say this, they had enough problems going with their first one, and now they're introducing a second one in Branson, Missouri, and then Sevierville, Tennessee. And, I have it up there, too big to fail, Herald of Truth Apologetics Press, what's next? I'm not saying that I am wishing error, just to be spewed out of Polishing the Pulpit, but I'm saying you're already having problems. I don't know why we can't all collectively at this moment say we're going to take some notes from the past and start doing better.
Well, it is a melting pot. I'm saying when you really get down to it, there are people at Polishing the Pulpit together that will never be together in the local sense.
Right.
Absolutely never. Just take Wesley Simons, for instance, at the Elizabeth, Wesley's not a major player at the Tri-City School of Preaching, but there was a time when many of the individuals at Polishing the Pulpit would never be at Tri-City's lectures.
Right.
And, just because, really, when you start doing this, when you start coalescing with these individuals in these what's called minor time frames, you get used to being around them. And that's the whole danger of all of this, It's like these guys, just take J. Lockhart. J. Lockhart was making a circuit around in Texas there for a while. And, people would go and hear him, and they're like, wow, we could be having J. Lockhart. And the next thing you know, J. Lockhart, who has been in all of these liberal schools that we've been talking about, and just rubbing shoulders with all of the individuals that we've been talking about, Pepperdine, Abilene, women preachers, the whole bit. I'm not saying he was on Pepperdine, but these people that were on Pepperdine with all of these things that are going on, changing the church into the Christian church if possible, or just a community church.
Community church, yeah.
He's been rubbing shoulders with all of them. Next thing you know, he's on Focal Point. And he's, basically making his rounds. He's on the master's program over at Bear Valley School of Preaching. Seriously? You've got a guy who is on the same lectureship with Jerry Rushford, and he's on the master's program at Bear Valley. And then you've got guys like Terrence Dindy, who's getting his master's from over there at the same time. And it just you think this, no, I wasn't bothered. I wasn't tainted by that. You didn't oppose it. None of y'all opposed them. And it's just, that's what's going on at Polishing the Pulpit. Right. You are mixing and mingling with people that you absolutely are not going to ever be in fellowship with at home.
And I don't know why it doesn't work reverse. The opposite of something has to be true also. So consistently what people have told you, Dan Winkler said it, Johnny, you're going to make your circle so small, it's just going to be you in it. Well, that's what they always say. Is there never a time where y'all made y'all circle so big that y'all had people in it that you shouldn't have had?
And J. Lockhart said the same thing to us. You people that are against all the schools, you basically are going to be against everybody that you associate with. And then he turned right around in the same discussion in person and says, Freed Hardeman is the last bastion of sound brethren. Excuse me? You just said on tape the very thing that you were accusing us of.
You said everything that I would say minus one.
Yeah.
Because it's like I wouldn't have put Freed Hardeman in there.
For real.
But so, and that goes back to our point that we've said over and over. They do it when they want to. They don't let you do it. And, you brought up Wesley Simons. Wesley was that way. Wesley can marginalize anybody he wants to. But when you start raising your hand and saying, well, what are we going to do about this situation? They just marginalize you. Wesley told me on the phone that he's not going back to PTP either, but he wouldn't tell me why. Great. You really helped me, right? I mean, you're not helping
really
anybody.
Helped them too. I'm sure they're going to really miss, with 5,000 people, they're going to miss Wesley Simons, you know? And they could miss Wesley Simons if Wesley would have said something to them. And I'm saying said something to them substantive, not just, you know, I'm not coming over here, and I'm not saying Wesley wouldn't have said something substantive if he would have said it.
And while he says, he told me, he said, I don't go back. He said, I'm not telling you why. Everybody at Tri-City is still going to PTP. So again, I mean, that's not even
affecting anybody.
That's not a real move either. So let's look at this. I asked, we started out by saying what the Rubel Shelly interview did accomplish, and I said I do think it affected some people's minds. And I think that the conversations just like this one and the one that we've had last year around February, I think that it had effect. So what we said last time, this was the 2023 lineup that I mentioned to Alan Hires. 4 Pepperdine speakers: Dale Maynard, Bruce McClarty, Noel Whitlock, and David Skidmore. And, you know, he's appeared on their social media. He's a Winterfest Jeff Walling speaker. And my point was, you could replace any of these 4 men with Rubel Shelly and nothing would have changed. You know, it's just the thing. Rubel Shelly has a bigger name than these guys. Well, here is what happened from last year to now. 2 of these guys are out. So there's always the possibility. This is what I'm saying. Here are our possibilities. Freed Hardman didn't invite them back. Did not invite them back. It might be possible. David Skidmore said, I don't want to come back. If y'all are going to be making it where I can't be with Jeff Walling, I don't want to come back. That's possible. It's always possible they just got sick. Couldn't come. We never know. Like, people never know because...
And just, you know, people are not going to know. David Skidmore is a ministry partner with Jeff Walling at Pepperdine. It's on there. Like, you just cannot dissect the two of them.
Separate it.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so for Freed Hardeman to have somebody that is in ministry with Jeff Walling is inexcusable in any realm. There's just no way you can say that that's okay. So for him, that's a question that somebody needs to find out. You know, there's enough of you guys that go to Freed Hardeman and that you're involved in Freed Hardeman, it's your alma mater, and Freed Hardeman is everything. You ask the question, why was David Skidmore on here when he is in ministry, unabashed with Jeff Walling at Pepperdine? And I'm saying at Pepperdine, on their website, you know, it's a youth men's ministry.
And then this is that moment again where someone like says to me and you, why do you think you even get to say this? Milton Sewell already said this.
Right.
Milton Sewell said Jerry Rushford did not get to come here while I'm in charge.
Earl Edwards.
Right. Earl Edwards said, one time at Pepperdine is enough for me. Well, that canceled out Bruce McClarty then. So it's not just Dale Maynard's coming back, and obviously Bruce McClarty's going to be there.
David Skidmore's at Winterfest as well. I mean, you had him at Winterfest the same year that you had him at Freed Hardeman.
Right.
That's inexcusable.
Yeah. And it's just, you know.
Except that David Shannon goes to Winterfest also.
And this is where someone says, well, he doesn't go to be on the program. Well, what if he did?
Well, even people said that he didn't go into any of the lectures, and it's like you lower level rank and file individuals don't know what David Shannon is doing anytime.
And he's still going to see all the same people at the president's meeting. The 16 different colleges will get together at the president's meeting. So you have to take note of this. And this is not like us ringing a bell. We did that. That's not what we're doing here. This is consistency. Are you trying? Or are you just like giving in whole hog? So here's the next one. I checked. I double checked. I double checked. Now, if I'm wrong, they are clearly open to say I'm wrong and say, no, I'd go if I was invited. But after, in 2023, when Freed Hardeman had 4 different Pepperdine speakers on the program, you check out this year's pamphlet, B.J. Clark is not on it. And he was last year. So the way that it's looking right now is there's not a single MSOP or GBN faculty slash staff member on the 2024 lectures. But you are still going to find, and now you go back and someone says, oh, well then that's good for them. Yeah. If that's what they're doing, because again, you never know. He may have just said, I'm too busy. It has nothing to do with like the 4 Pepperdine speakers. I'm just too busy. It's always back room. You never get a solid statement of why didn't you go to the 2024 lectures when you were there the year before.
And if you want to correct us, if any one of them want to correct us, or you find out that they said that's not why, we'd be glad to publish that.
Yeah, I will.
That you're going, that you had something else, but you'd be glad to go to Freed-Hardeman with all the liberals.
And here's my thing too. They cut out whatever. David Skidmore's not there this year. Noel Whitlock is not there this year. There are still going to be 3 Pepperdine speakers there, even though these are just 2. There's another one I'm going to show you. And then there's going to be one who essentially might as well be on Pepperdine because he's with these Pepperdine people everywhere he goes. Now, here's the next point. If it's the case that individuals like Don Blackwell and B.J. Clark, they're saying, no, I'm not going back to Freed-Hardeman while they keep trying to connect me to these Pepperdine speakers, well, you're going to have a hard time because Steve Higginbotham, who's the preacher at Carnes in Knoxville, which is the house of East Tennessee School of Preaching, he's still going, and he's going to be on with 3 Pepperdine speakers this year. Denny Petrello, the director of Bear Valley School of Preaching, he's going. He's going to be on with 3 Pepperdine speakers this year. And Brian Kenyon, who is the director of the Florida School of Preaching, not to be confused with Florida College, Florida School of Preaching, Brian Kenyon is going to be there, and he's going to share the pulpit with 3 different Pepperdine speakers, and then a 4th character who might as well be. So this is what I said to you a moment ago. People say, well, you make your circle so small. Well, it is the case that Don Blackwell and B.J. Clark have made their circle so big that they can't help but run into Steve Higginbotham. Like, what does this do now if it's the case that B.J. Clark said, no, I told him I'm not coming back? Well, Steve Higginbotham still went. And you're going to see Steve Higginbotham at PTP, right? Yeah. Like, you're still coming to PTP. Does Denny Petrello get to come to PTP? Does Brian Kenyon? Like, they're gonna do it again. Steve Higginbotham did it last year. 4 Pepperdine speakers. Steve Higginbotham just did it. And he's going to do it again this year. So, the circle can get too big.
Well, folks, too, can I just tell you that we're not divulging all of the things that we could actually divulge? And it's like, the reason why we're not is because as we discussed this point right here, I'm saying Caleb and I discussed whether to mention that they're not going to Freed-Hardeman. Because if they're not going to Freed-Hardeman, that's great. And then if we say that they're not going to Freed-Hardeman, then they, individuals say, and I'm saying absolutely we know. Just last night, 2 nights ago, a congregation in Texas found out that we were talking about certain things that were going on in that congregation, and they made the statement that we're violating their autonomy. If they do what we're happy about, it would be a violation of their autonomy, and that we could actually say that we had something to do with the moves that we made. You just can't win.
No.
I mean, that's so absolutely false what they actually said. Their subjective thinking about what we say about their congregation. We were actually very positive about things that were going on over there and had nothing to do with the changes in it. But here's the point. We are not basically saying that they didn't go because of anything we said. We're just saying they're not going to be there. We talked about it. They're not going to be there. It would be wonderful if we had that kind of influence, but I will say this. There are plenty of people that talk to them about them being over there.
Yeah.
And, it was appalling to a lot of people that Freed-Hardeman was having Pepperdine people on there. But if we wanted to, I promise you, if we wanted to, we could show you texts that are sent to us from other directions where individuals have been saying behind the scenes, we're not fellowshipping that, we're not fellowshipping that one.
Oh, yeah. And that's what I was saying. You never get the clear statement. It's always behind the scenes. So one note, too, before we move forward was the congregation who said, like when you said, we can't win for losing in some of these instances, when that was told to you that, basically there are people that are opposing doing the right thing and they don't want to let you toot a horn, your response back to them was, well, what we're not going to do, him included, you were saying to him, what we're not going to do is we're not going to start taking this stuff personally.
Yeah.
Because if we start taking it personally, it's just going to eat away at us, and we'll probably start making bad moves. They'll start looking at us like we're nasty. So I'm saying even in all this, that's still the game plan. We're not going to start making stuff personal.
There's people that are watching that will watch this, And they'll be sitting through this entire interview and saying, okay, they're going to say something about us next.
And
we didn't.
Right.
You know who I'm talking about.
No, but my thing.
Well, Phil Sanders got taken off of.
Oh, well, that's coming.
I was.
Yeah, so. But my thing about it is, so what? Doesn't mean I hate you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just talking about facts. We're trying to be consistent. Like, if we can't do this, then what they're saying is every time they talk about somebody, they hate them.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't. And I was going to say this, too. I still hear a lot of good things about Don Blackwell.
Oh, yeah.
Like, basically, and again, if someone wants to say that that's wrong, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. What I heard was Don Blackwell went into Cookeville and split a church that needed to be split. Good. Yeah. If that's how it happened, that's great. I mean, what are we going to do?
If he was at Willow Avenue, and there's no way Don Blackwell could actually be at Willow Avenue and not have trouble.
Yeah.
So God bless him for making a distinction between good brethren and goats.
Right.
Because that's what was at Willow Avenue.
And
so God bless him.
Is today still Wednesday? That's what I said this morning. I think I don't want to be hanging out with goats.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be hanging out with the tares. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if people thought, well, you know, I didn't think that you'd give them any credit. Hey, if you're in there doing that, good for you. I mean, and it's not just about splitting and dividing, but we're saying if we want to do the right thing and some people are hampering the right thing, then let's start moving on. This is the individual that I said, you know, we are having conversation about what happened last year, 2023, and now B.J. Clark is not there. Two other people that were from Pepperdine. Pepperdine speakers are no longer there. Y'all need to start looking at Chris McCurley. Chris McCurley is going to be speaking on Revelation 4 and 5 in Lloyd Auditorium at the 2024 Freed Hardeman Lectures. And you're saying, I don't know who Chris McCurley is. Chris McCurley, I think it's in Dixon, Tennessee, and I believe it's called the Walnut Congregation. But beyond that, Chris McCurley is listed as a board member of the Red River Family Encampment, which happens in New Mexico. And this is who you're going to see with Chris McCurley at the upcoming Red River Encampment. Now, look at this. Saturday, June 24th, Keith Lancaster. Keith Lancaster is with a cappella vocal group, which performs in denominations all over the place. Keith is a regular at Pepperdine.
He's housed, their group is housed, home is Oklahoma Christian, and co-founder is at Don McLaughlin's church in North Atlanta.
Is his name Stephen Maxwell. That's right.
Yeah. And they have a mechanical music there, and Don McLaughlin's daughter is Amy, and she is a woman preacher in the Church of Christ. So
at Abilene. She's on staff at Abilene.
And you can't get further along. And by the way, we have an audio, I don't know if we get to play it tonight, where Jay Lockhart distances himself as far as he can from Keith Lancaster. I don't know where Keith Lancaster was when I was Oklahoma Christian, but I was going to chase him down and tell him I wasn't in fellowship with him.
And that, to me, that also is a bit crazy. Like, why not?
Yeah. Well, you don't have to chase him down. You can call his name from the pulpit. That's telling the truth.
But my thing is, like, y'all are almost never taking this seriously.
Yeah.
It's always like, well, I'm not going to, like, waste my time.
Yeah.
Oh, I kind of thought you thought that souls were on the line.
Yeah.
I mean, they are.
That was said to him in that discussion on the phone, and it just aggravated him to no end.
So this is still Red River Encampment, where Chris McCurley is a board member. They're going to have Pepperdine's Keith Lancaster. Billy McGuigan is a Pepperdine speaker. Orpheus Hayward is a Pepperdine speaker. This year. That's what you're calling it?
2023.
You're right.
Yeah.
Last year. Orpheus Hayward was on Pepperdine in 2023. It's called the Renaissance Church in Atlanta. They use instrumental music. And he is...
full fellowship with denominations.
Yes. And so he's on the program down here at the bottom. Who is Chris McCurley?
Sorry about that.
Chris McCurley is going to be, he is a board member at Red River Family Encampment. He's a speaker on Red River Family Encampment, and he's going to be with Keith Lancaster, Pepperdine speaker, Billy McGuigan, Pepperdine speaker, Orpheus Hayward, Pepperdine speaker. Jeff Jenkins will be there and probably say nothing. Tim Lewis will be there and probably say nothing. Wes McAdams will not have a problem at all, and neither will Jacob Rutledge. Now, I reference him being a board member because when speakers do this, when speakers share the pulpit with Pepperdine personalities, they say, I'm just a speaker.
Yeah.
I don't know who these people are. No, Chris McCurley is a board member. He absolutely knows who these people are, and if he doesn't, then his title as board member is a joke. How does he get to be on Freed Hardeman in Lloyd Auditorium while he's a board member at Red River Family Encampment and all these Pepperdine speakers are coming?
How does Jeff Jenkins get to be on focal point in San Marcos, Texas, after or prior to whatever in proximity with being on Red River? I mean, 15 years ago, Sam Dilbeck, the preacher at San Marcos at the University Congregation, would not be tolerable at all for him to have any of this said about him when he was in Leonard, Texas.
Right.
But he's been associated with Bear Valley long enough that it just like water off a duck's back.
Yeah.
And so Jeff Jenkins, it just is beyond, just really beyond understanding how Jeff Jenkins could be on this and be on focal point at the same time.
Well, here's what Don Blackwell said after he saw this same lineup.
Okay.
Keith Lancaster, Billy McGuigan, and the key issue for Don seeing it had to do with Jeff Jenkins and Tim Lewis. Because, I mean, these North MacArthur Affirming the Faith, you're going to see a number of people over there. But here's what Don said. When Don saw the 2023 Red River lineup and was asked about Jeff Jenkins, his response was, and that's why I don't use Jeff Jenkins. And he says this. He starts saying it's possible that he could be at a place where some false teachers are and he's going to weigh these options, but this is what Don says at the very end. I want to ensure that I will not appear to be endorsing or fellowshipping the error. So when Don Blackwell saw the Red River 2023 lineup that had Jeff Jenkins and Chris McCurley, he said that's why we don't use any of the guys. So if you ask Don Blackwell, what do you think about Orpheus Hayward? Don't use him. What do you think about Keith Lancaster? Don Blackwell says don't use him. What do you think about Billy McGuigan? Don't use him. But what do you say about Chris McCurley? Don't use him. But Chris McCurley is coming to Freed Hardeman lectures. And he's with all these Pepperdine guys. Don Blackwell says don't use them. Here's a quote from Alan Hires again. Fellowship without endorsement. That's what they're all practicing at Freed Hardeman these days with Chris McCurley. And, you know, I still hear very good things about Aaron. This is not hard, right? Like this is someone says, boy, you didn't have to throw Aaron Gallagher under the bus. No, if you're going to be playing this game, you're going to have to play well. What else are we doing? Don Blackwell is on the record saying, I don't use Jeff Jenkins. Well, Aaron Gallagher is going to be April 21 and 24th. He's going to be sharing the pulpit at East Tennessee Lectures.
Our Southeastern Biblical Institute.
Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies at Carnes Congregation, Knoxville, Tennessee. This is exactly what I said to Alan Hires in the interview. Alan Hires, when he said the antis, the non-institutional brethren, I said, isn't that confusing? Because back in the day, they'd be fighting, but they'd be holding meetings for each other. I said, wasn't that confusing for people in the pew? And he said, could have been. And then after the whole fight with Herald of Truth, Thomas Warren just kept fellowshipping with Harold Hazelip and Lynn Anderson. And I asked Alan Hires, wasn't that confusing? And he said, could have been. This is clearly confusing to Joyce Judd. I don't know who Joyce Judd is, but when Joyce Judd saw the lineup at East Tennessee, she said, oh, what a wonderful group of speakers. Truth be told by Don Blackwell, it's not. Because if it was a wonderful group, solid group, Jeff Jenkins wouldn't be in it. And he has to say the same thing about Steve Higginbotham, who last year shared the pulpit with 4 Pepperdine speakers, and this year is going to share it with 3, plus Chris McCurley.
And just like this with Tim Lewis.
Yeah.
If you call up the North MacArthur Church of Christ and you ask Tim Lewis's, you ask the secretary or whomever, they will tell you, oh, Steve Higginbotham, he comes in here, he doesn't do his lecture and take off. He stays around. So North MacArthur is the mixing pool for
this year Randy Roper is going to be. at North MacArthur, and Randy Roper is a Pepperdine speaker, and that's Phil Sanders' preacher,
Yeah.
which moves us into this next one. You brought up Focal Point. This is a post by Wayne Jones. Wayne Jones took a job with, Bear Valley in Colorado, but he's still, from a distance, he's still working Focal Point, even though Sam Dilbeck is there. And here's their lineup. You know, and this may not be exhaustive. And again, if I miss something, then they are obviously free to correct me. Wayne Jones says, we are still working to finalize the schedules, but you're not going to want to miss this year's Focal Point. Confirmed speakers include Rick Brumbrack, who is now at Freed Hardeman, where they're about to use 3 Pepperdine speakers plus Chris McCurley. Dan Winkler, who will be at Freed Hardeman with 3 Pepperdine speakers. I'm going to start skipping some. Sam Dilbeck, Drew Leonard, Carla Moore, Eric Owens, he's a big PTP personality, Steve Higginbotham, Dale and Jeff Jenkins, Steve Lloyd, Matthew Wendy Gibson, Aubrey Deaver, that's Mac Deaver's grandson's wife. All these people are coming to Focal Point. Now, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the same time that there's not an MSOP man on the Freed Hardeman lectures, at the same time there's not one Texas School of Preaching personality on Focal Point. There's not one MSOP man on Focal Point. So basically what it starts shaking up to be is
that's Wayne Jones' brother-in-law is a Memphis man, and
I didn't think about that.
He's included, used to be included all the time.
Oh, Dan Cates.
Dan Cates.
And then Wayne Jones' dad is teaching at Wesley School, Tri-City School, and so that's where I say the circle has clearly gotten too big. They never make a decision on what's right and what's wrong. They always make decisions on, this is going to affect my brother-in-law, this is going to affect my dad, on and on and on. So basically, what you do have, Dale and Jeff Jenkins coming to Focal Point means you don't get Don Blackwell, which should mean you're not going to get Aaron Gallagher. It looks like you're not going to get B.J. Clark. So that's what I was going to say is some people need to basically look around and ask the question, is Texas School of Preaching and Memphis School of Preaching about to leave y'all behind, essentially with Freed Hardeman and Bear Valley?
Well, I absolutely can state, without any reservation, that Terrence Dindy is not going to be for this. Whether or not he's going to speak out against it, he's already told us. I'm saying we're basically hearing from him and from Omari French in no uncertain terms that they're not messing around with liberals.
Oh, yeah.
That's a house full of liberals.
Oh, yeah.
They will be with anybody, those people that... Drew Leonard, man, you talk about a change. That's unbelievable. I heard you discussing the things that you were putting up there, but I didn't see it in print. I cannot believe that Drew Leonard's grandfather is not... whatever you say about a person who's still alive.
Rolling in his grave.
Yeah, he's alive though.
But this is, and so,
His parents as well. Drew Leonard's parents.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes no sense either. Drew is in the same area as Wesley. Wesley's telling me on the phone, I'm not going to PTP. Everybody from PTP is coming to Focal Point, and Drew's right there. Dale Jenkins, Jeff Jenkins. So you said this earlier, and I'm saying, take a look around. Where are the Texas School of Preachers? Where's the Memphis School of Preachers? Are they leaving y'all behind? Are they giving you any heads up? We're leaving y'all. Now, here's the next one. And
I'm saying Jason Rollo too. Jason Rollo's not fooling around with these people.
Yeah.
If he is, then that's just, I don't give up.
Yeah.
There's just hope for everybody. And I absolutely, unless I'm told unequivocally, I absolutely guarantee you Jason Rollo is not with these folk. I used to say that with Sam Dilbeck, but, once he went to Corsicana, it just, that changed that.
Well, and that's what people would have used to have said about Mike Vestal also. He's in that
For
list.
sure.
I didn't list him, but
Yeah.
plenty of people used to would have said that about
Yeah,
Mike
absolutely.
Vestal. So here's what you said earlier about you brought him up and you said maybe someone said, oh, well, they made a whole program. They didn't talk about me. So this is what I said, too, about you need to start looking around and seeing if Don Blackwell is about to leave you behind. Because he said, I'm not using Jeff Jenkins and I'm not using Chris McCurley. And clearly, Freed Hardeman is going to keep doing that. This was put out, and this is just the statement, and they can correct it if they want to. A member from South Seminole down in Florida, where Gary Summers is the preacher, he said, I would suggest a call to Gary Summers and work out the difference. He said, I think some of the accusations you made are beyond what the data actually shows, and Evan Diaz has gotten GBN to remove Phil Sanders from the PTP lineup. This is, that's Evan, that's his wife. They went to PTP. He does work with GBN, and according to this individual, he says Evan convinced GBN to remove Phil Sanders. I can't believe that Cody McCoy didn't have that done. Cody McCoy came out of the Portland congregation and just went right into house to house, heart to heart, and polishing the pulpit. And of course, this would be a moment where Cody McCoy could say back, you don't know what I do with PTP. And I would say back, my point exactly. We never know which way y'all's wind is blowing. And so,
in 2015, they put out a just unequivocal statement at the Wildcat the Wildcat Drive congregation, Church of Christ in Portland, not having anything to do with Bear Valley. And I'm just saying, how can you be not having anything to do with Bear Valley? Mm-hmm. And any of the folk that are, if they're going to Focal Point, you're having to do, flat out, you're having to do with people that are with Bear Valley and the whole crowd. Matter of fact, Brian Kenyon was there. He just said, I had no idea about Jay Lockhart. We've used him. We're not going to use him anymore. And, you know, if Jay Lockhart was still around, he would still be on the board of directors at Freed Hardeman. Mm-hmm. My understanding is the only reason he's off, I don't know this, but I know that his wife had Alzheimer's. He just couldn't be doing the things that he used to do. And so,
And we've seen that a number of times.
Oh, yeah.
Someone being scheduled to be on a lectureship, you say something about it, they say, hey, I didn't even go to that. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, you pulled out because of principle? And they say, no, I had the flu.
Yeah.
I'm not going over there while I had the flu. So, you know, if that's true, I say that needs to be done. Phil Sanders need to be taken off of PTP. Randy Roper, his preacher, is, you know, fine to be with women preachers on Pepperdine just like Bruce McClarty. But now here's my question. Someone says, you're making the circle so small, nobody's going to be in it. And I'm asking, is it not possible that y'all made y'all circle so big there are people in it who shouldn't be? What are y'all going to do about Dan Winkler? If you're taking Phil Sanders off and you're saying that you will not use Jeff Jenkins, I don't know how Dan Winkler is coming back to polishing the pulpit. Yeah. He is, 5 days ago, Dan Winkler preached at the Sunset School of Preaching lectures. And he was there with Pepperdine people, Pepperdine speakers. Dan Winkler, living the transformed life. And on, you know, this is minuscule, but I'm saying folk from back when would be having a cow that he's using a woman translator. Do you know that Sunset is historically known for saying that the guilty party can remarry, direct operation of the Holy Spirit? Their graduates frequently come out ecumenical, which, you know, y'all are all saying that you're not for unity and diversity, you're not for fellowship without endorsement, but that is Sunset MO, and it has been for decades. You think that Dan Winkler doesn't know what Sunset is?
I know he knows what Sunset is.
There's no way. It's like, my generation's not going to know anything about Sunset. And here's the other thing, too. It's like, if I could ask guys, I'm 30, if I could ask a number of guys, hey, do you like Wayne Jackson material? I love Wayne Jackson material. And then I'd ask them, did you read his debate that he had with one of the teachers from Sunset? No. And I'm saying, they were having it about, can the guilty party remarry? And it's just so easily documented. I recognize there are a number of papers that I would read where someone's like, I'm not even gonna hunt that stuff down. That book is readily available.
It is just guaranteed that the Brown Trail School of Preaching folk know that Wendell Winkler would not be involved with Sunset. Yeah. And I'm saying that's his dad.
Oh yeah.
No way. People around here, people that's listening probably don't even know Wendell Winkler, but the Brown Trail School of Preaching people do. And it's like, what are you doing? You know, could you save this guy? I mean, that's what you're choosing not to do if you won't say anything. You're basically guaranteeing that Wendell Winkler and Dan Winkler will not spend eternity together. This is an individual who is involved with, we're basically saying, Sunset has the rankest individuals. They don't have a problem with Pepperdine when you really get down to it.
Not at all. And so here's my thing, I get older Sunset graduates that call me.
Yeah.
And all I have to do to them is, like, I say, well, would you go to Pepperdine? And they say, oh, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And then I say, well, then I start giving them a list of all the different Pepperdine speakers that come into Sunset, and they'll tell me. And they'll say, well, I haven't kept up with the school, but I am a graduate. And I say, well, that's where they are. So here's another thing to think about. Why does Dan need to be at Sunset? He already gets prime time at the Memphis lectures. I think he's their closeout speaker every year. And he's on polishing the pulpit. It's like, if those things weren't enough, and now let me do this too. Everybody keeps saying, well, if they invite me to come speak on the truth, y'all keep acting like these are lost folk. You know, You're not going to a Baptist congregation to present the gospel. You're not going to a Mormon conference to promote the Bible. You're going into, Bill Love said, congenital Church of Christers, born into it. You're just going to traditional people. Jimmy Lovell said, every person deserves to hear the gospel once more than anybody deserves to hear it twice, and y'all always talk to me like it's the mission field. How did you end up, like if I'm talking to Dan Winkler, how did you end up to Sunset? Well, they invited me to teach the truth. What does that say about the rest of the faculty? You think Truman Scott can't do it? Or Truett Adair can't do it? That's Ed Wharton. Like, these characters need Dan Winkler to come in. This is politics. This is the buddy system. And basically, Dan Winkler, and I would say this is what this moment is Dan Winkler is excelling beyond West Memphis, which is what was said back in 1984. I'm done situating myself to the western corner of Memphis, Tennessee. And you're going on to the bigger field. So this is just all over the place. We'll go ahead and stop, but this is the third Pepperdine speaker who's going to be on Freed Hardeman this year. His name is Terry Gardner. He's part of the Friends of the Restoration group, life and work of Joseph Warlick, Hope Barber Academic Resource Center. He's probably not going to be main stage by any means.
In the discussion between Jerry Rushford and Alan Hires, Jerry can't wait to get to Freed Hardeman to see Jerry, to see Gardner.
Oh?
Yeah.
Well, I knew he said Friends of Restoration. I didn't know he said that.
He said him in particular.
But that who he's sitting next to, this is Terry Gardner. Terry Gardner's not only a former Pepperdine speaker, but just this last year, this is him at Southwestern Christian College. That is Orpheus Hayward. Orpheus Hayward, who uses the piano at Renaissance Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and who is open fellowship with denominations. There's Terry Gardner. And of course, Terry Gardner is going to tell you, I'm just a lawyer who dabbles in restoration history. You're a Christian, and you're not paying attention at all to fellowship. It's fellowship without endorsement, and they're all doing it. And I recognize this is just an award, but I'm saying Pepperdine gave an award to Terry Gardner, and when you look at their magazine, he is listed as receiving this reward right next to Victor Knowles. Victor Knowles is a very popular preacher within the Christian church, and it's like y'all have a cow when you start talking about the piano in the Christian church, but then you're almost everywhere.
They have a cow when you interview Rubel Shelly.
Right.
And you're clearly opposed to Rubel Shelly, and he knows you're opposed to him.
Yeah.
He actually said, don't even do this interview because you're going to hurt yourself with your brethren. It's like,
don't get yourself in trouble fooling with me, is what he said. And so Victor Knowles is someone who is very, very much involved in historical personalities, and he's written different biographies. And so that's where I said no one's going to know Edward Fudge. Terry Gardner, when you look at the Pepperdine lineup, Terry Gardner, when he was there, was right by Edward Fudge.
unbelievable.
Edward Fudge started out as a non-institutional individual.
Anti.
Right.
So everybody knows.
Right, and then he said, there is no hell, and then he became ecumenical and everybody kicked him out, and then there's Terry Gardner with him. So, here's where we closed last time. This is James Bales He says, "Shall we splinter?" This is his booklet that a lot of people didn't read. And he just said, folk are going to keep dividing and dividing and dividing, but then the audio you're going to hear tomorrow night where Alan Hires is going to say this isn't a unity movement, this is just a fellowship movement. And he says they all want us to get together without any type of agreement at all. And I would just say they're doing it right now in front of your face. All over Freed-Hardeman, all over Focal Point. It's not a unity movement. It's a fellowship movement. And I'll say this is the last one. This is what Michael Wyatt said to us as we were talking to him about a lot of this at Get Well lectures. He just said, I haven't kept up. I don't know this stuff. I haven't kept up. That translates to I don't care anymore.
Right.
There's just no other way to shape that, which is what a lot of people are saying these days. They'll be like, well, what's Johnny talking about? What's he getting at? I don't know about these people. And it's people who used to be on the ball. And, like someone says, what you singling out Michael for? He's, as far as that group goes, dime a dozen. I ain't kept up. You don't care anymore. That's all that shakes out to. You got all this stuff going on right in your backyard. You don't care anymore. Now, this is all intro and primer for the Candid Christian Interview Series. Who's next? Steve Wolfgang in Chicago, Illinois has agreed. This is well, I don't know what you'd call it. This is a still shot of the interview process. But Steve Wolfgang, and I'll say this too as we go out, who is Steve Wolfgang? Well, if you watch the Alan Hires interview, you're going to hear me talk about this book, the 1968 Arlington meeting between non-institutionals and the institutionals, and the label's going to be out there, the antis versus the liberals. Well, that's what Alan Hires participated in, 68. Steve Wolfgang is in the Dallas meeting in 1990, so it absolutely makes sense to have conversation with Steve Wolfgang after Alan Hires. And he is someone who has lived through it. He has a very good handle of history just in general, and so that will be very good. And then, of course, we have more people who are lined up. But all this, like you were saying in all different parts of it, none of it's personal. And we love all these different people that we talked about. And I said before, too, there's not anyone I can think of that you would say, Caleb hates him so much, there's no way he'd interview him.
Well, what my thoughts are about this is Caleb is, I would say, he is fond of all of this. I'm seeing all of these characters. Many of these he grew up with. Some of them he actually was around, didn't know it because he was a kid. But what a wonderful thing if what we're doing could allow him to have fellowship with some of those individuals again. And so, Dave Miller, when we're talking about him, I knew Dave Miller. Dave Miller knows exactly who we are, where he frequents in Montgomery. The Panama Street Church of Christ supported me while I was overseas. I mean, none of this is foreign to me, and I certainly long to be able to have the sweet, enjoyable Christian fellowship that we once had. This is the way we do it. We actually have to try to bring folk to their thinking. What are you thinking? Bring them back to positive thinking about the truth. And my goal in all this is for Caleb to be able to meet some of these individuals, even if you have to meet them in one of these segments like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you feel about Alan Hires now, after you've been with him? It was wonderful.
It was wonderful.
I mean, we have disagreement here, and we got things that we got to work out, but it was wonderful. That was my first time to actually meet Alan Hires, even though I have these things that I know about.
Yeah, he was absolutely like Southern gentleman, all kinds of Southern charm. And I will say this, it probably would not have happened without his wife.
And Brent.
Brent Job. And so Brent putting in some good words with him, and his wife was super, super helpful. If we're all being honest, she said yes before Alan did, because I was talking with her, and as just at some point she goes, he can probably do it. And so she gave up time with her grandkids, and all of it was just fantastic and enjoyable. And so I think that as people watch it tomorrow night, it'll be premiering at 8 p.m. I think that every bit of it, you're going to love it. You're going to love the stories, but you're just going to hit a moment where you're going to say, that fellowship talk was weird. And I don't know what to tell you. But I loved it. He gave me a lot of time that he didn't have to. It was fantastic. And so just be praying as we go along, more conversations.
The people that we saw from Olive Branch, love seeing them. One of the elders at Olive Branch, Mississippi, also Michael White. I've known Michael White I don't even know how long, 25 years probably.
Yeah.
And we have no ill will on any of these segments. And I think these individuals, upon seeing some of this, they will reflect. It's not us that changed. Y'all have changed. And we're saying we're just dying to have the kind of fellowship that we used to have. So, you know what the antis all said, y'all left us and changed, you know, and I don't know how that really goes, whether it's true or not. But I do know in this situation, I was, as I said, jacked up by Curtis Gates. He was not a moderate by any stretch of the imagination. And these are the things that we were all taught biblically. And, you know, I haven't lost anything. You know, the lectureships in the gospel meetings, I wasn't wanting to do those anyway. I've turned down lectureships, some of the really well-known lectureships and gospel meetings. We're doing what we're doing now because we love lost souls, people that we're trying to encourage. We love you, and we would like to have help, you know,
Right.
in this. Some of the young people that are not associated with us anymore like to have help.
Well, I'd say, like you're saying, getting back together, moving forward and getting back together can't happen without at least talking to each other. And that's what we're trying to do with the interview. So thank you for talking to us. Thank you for being a part of the discussion tonight. We love you. God bless you. Keep asking, what does the Bible say?